Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
Synctank.
Bros, it's Earth Day. Happy Earth Day.
Today?
Today. Yeah, couldn't you know she's like 6 billion years young or something like I don't know. Earth Day is such a weird Greenpeace like eco-terrorist holiday. I remember in school, like they used to like tell the kids that we were all gonna die by lunchtime, and
Yeah.
you know, it was a lot. It was a lot. Now they're telling us that the human population rate is dropping so fast that we're gonna either end up, you know, extinct or Muslim. And
I feel like you're messing with me right now.
How? Why?
on which part, you know, well, things just happen.
I'm hearing a crazy echo, and I feel like you both are screwing with me.
Oh, do you have it open in another window? I did that once.
It's got to be Marco, Polo, Marco.
No, do
I
you
think
see
you're
another?
the only
Do
one.
you have it? Do you have a tab? Do you have a tab? Because I don't hear an echo. So.
Yeah, we're fine. It's you, bro. Yeah, get out of here. What do you get out of here? Paranoid.
He'll be back. Maybe it
He's
was
a very-
it was probably the pen. That's what
He was
did it.
Paranoid American. That's what it is. I don't know. Trump wants to give $5,000 to baby mamas. Wait, this isn't even the real tab. Hold on, let me try that. Take 2 and action. Trump wants to give $5,000 to potential baby mamas. A baby bonus for every new mom after delivery.
Well, you know that. Well, when it came to the his position on abortion at the time, which shouldn't have been controversial, but people treated it as controversial. Oh, I shouldn't say it. Kennedy's position on abortion was such that he was making an argument that if you're looking at the issue, there's deeper issues of like if people ask the reason why are less women having children, he would say that it seems like we have indication that a lot of that is for financial reasons. So I imagine Trump is like, oh, well, if they're not having babies because they don't think they'll be able to afford them in the future, I don't know how $5,000 is going to answer that, because we're talking about people's actual feelings on the future in this country. Are they optimistic around will they be able to, in the future, continue to be able to take care of their children?
In Germany, you a few $100 a month till you're 25. You get like $300 or $400 or $500 every month, and like your parents get that until you're 18. Then you get that until you're 25. So I think that makes more sense than $5,000 up front, unless you're investing in Bitcoin. I don't know. It's America, so to me, I think that's a pretty
good old-fashioned American communism, right?
I mean, America always was communist. You know, right. I mean, it always was. It was an argument over how we do it. Do we do it like Trotsky or do we do it like Stalin? You know, that was right. We're socialist republic from the get-go. Education, military, these are social services. I don't know. I look at Japan, and Japan has a really dropping birth rate. Yeah. And I watched some interviews with people in Japan talking about becoming parents, and like, oh, I can't afford it, because having a kid to a Japanese person means $140,000. You have to have $140,000 ready to go is the way they look at it, or else they're not going to have kids. And that's basically what they tried to get Americans to think like for a long time. Right. In the 90s, 2000s, it was like, if you don't have money, you can't afford a kid. But that's not true elsewhere, right? Other countries, they're like, we need you to have kids. We need potential taxpayers in our future.
Right.
So we'll invest in you raising taxpayers, which is, that's a social service, but it's also incentivizing the tax for the government.
You can almost pinpoint too a place in American history when children went from becoming assets and they turned into liabilities, where you would have 8 kids and have them all working out on the farm with you. But there was like a turning point where now a kid loses a finger farming, you might be going to jail. You might have some issues. And that, I think, more than any weird ideological, like, the world's too overpopulated, any of that stuff, I think that very like capitalistic look at children, like, this thing's going to cost me money. This thing is a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. It's going to need orthodontics. It's going to need like all of these different expenses versus everyone I pump out, I make like a little bit extra money. And I'm not talking about welfare. I'm talking about like actually building a family business of some kind.
But I feel like that transition is equivalent to the transition from the free person into tax-paying citizen. So the liability, it used to be a benefit to a farm family. Now it's a liability to the family because it's such a benefit to the state. And the state needs these people so much more than they ever did before. Maybe not in countries like Roman imperial countries like the United States, where we take over other lands for their resources, including their people, right? Like you put a country through a war-torn situation, a country that has a lot of smart people, for instance, like you go to like Ethiopia or you go to India or something like that, there are a lot of smart people, just destroy their economy, tear Iraq, completely just destroy it. And then you've got really smart, triple IQ, hardworking people desperate for a job that'll get paid pennies on the dollar, right? So this is nothing different than the Roman Empire enslaving people and taking their food and their other resources. That's what America does. It's not sustainable, though, because at a certain point, you either run out of other countries to destroy or you start. I mean, you have to eventually consolidate. And so Japan's a small island. They're no longer colonially imperialistic. They're not like taking over the Philippines or the Koreas the way they used to be. So they have to sort of sustain their own population. They can't move them to Fiji necessarily. Like, this whole thing has changed for Japan. But how many people does Japan really need to function? At a certain point, they have to start giving $1,000 a month to Japanese people to have kids, or else they just won't. And that's where they haven't quite done that yet. I think it's on purpose. I think they've decided 130 million is probably enough people for Japan. They literally just want to have everyone in Japan live in a city, like a super city, and then the rest of the country just be like empty, And I think that's the thing. That goal comes from Rockefeller with Carter's Trilateral Commission, and California is still on Trilateral Commission agenda, but the rest of the United States is pushing really fast beyond that and trying to say we need a bigger population to deal with. I mean, is it because we're preparing for a war? Maybe. I think it's more just economics, like just having more citizens,
I gotta admit something, excuse my ignorance, but like when it comes to Trilateral Commission, like when I think of the Trilateral Commission, I'm thinking of Bilderberg Group. A Bilderberg Group was just the name of the building where these different people from the Trilateral Commission and other places would come together, right? But it's tell me more about the specifics around what Trilateral Commission. Well, is that not the name of the building?
They're different. So yeah, so the Bilderberg Club originally was named after, because it was almost a pseudonym or a pejorative, because this group of people from the Teutonic Order and the European Union.
They had no name, so that came from conspiracy theorists of what to call them because they happened to meet in this building.
In 1955, they met in Switzerland at the Bilderberg Hotel. But that was really because this was the Western European Atlanticist, starting with what's his name? Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands had connected the Teutonic families of Europe with the administrators of government established by the United States. So the Operation Gladio was like to take over after World War II, because the Russians were in Europe and the fascists were in Europe and the communists were, and so America's like, well, if we're not in Europe running it, other people will be, because it's so dismantled right now. So
what's
America,
the analogy of Club of Rome to Bilderberg Group? Because I kind of saw them as ancillary.
they're even older, arguably. It depends. I don't know. It depends how you look at it. So the Club of Rome is literally the Roman Jesuit connect, and so the Jesuits and the Catholic Church under Pope Pius had enabled the Nazis, the Reich, to take over Europe, and then decided to, in the 20s into 30s. So in the 20s they were already dealing with Mussolini, and by the 30s they're dealing with Hitler, and in the 40s they the Catholic Church abandons and betrays the Reich by working with the CIA or the OSS at the time. But the CIA emerges out of the Club of Rome, and this is the Jesuit Holy Liberation Theology order, right? Which is that you will own nothing and be happy. That all comes from the
original. The original.
And it's super old. It's this idea that we will all be altar boys. Everyone will be a father. Any potential woman could be a nun, and a righteous woman. And it's like, but at the same time, coming out of when nuns were prostitutes, a lot of the time, and priests were alcoholic, drug dealers, child molesters. There was a lot of horrible stuff going on when everybody was a priest and everybody was a nun, right? Get thee to a nunnery, right? In Shakespeare, get thee to a nunnery means go find a prostitute, right? It was just taken for granted.
So this idea of the WEF thing that goes way beyond that. Like, we're talking about all these different groups, but like ultimately,
Schwab just retired the other day, right? You heard that?
Right.
He stepped down from the WEF.
Right. I think we talked about that last week, but
no, it just happened. He was stepping down, but he stepped down on the same day at SOQUEL.
Oh, his official stepping down. Like they announced it. And then,
yeah. So his official stepping down was the same day as the death of the Pope. Right, the official death of the Pope, because a lot of people have been saying the Pope's been dead since
people
February.
say Easter Monday, which is funny.
Easter Monday,
yeah,
the moon, something crazy about that. Which is also Hitler's birthday was April 20th, so the 21st. There's something pretty weird about all that as well. So just the idea of the Club of Rome. And by the way, Thomas, you have, I'm sure, a comic or something about the Club of Rome, so I'm sure you could go even deeper in some respects. But that they're connected with, computer science, and the Jesuits love science, and so the idea of the Club of Rome computer for the simulation in the 70s, and the Rand Corporation, right? So American corporations helping the Club of Rome do all these things.
Yeah, they come a lot in the Macy conferences, a lot of the cybernetic stuff, but also what led me to the Club of Rome originally, I believe, was Jekyll Island, the Jekyll Island Hunt Club, which came together in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and from there, I believe Club of Rome was like a J.P. Morgan associated group. It was one of the key founders of the Jekyll Island Hunt Club.
Yeah, I mean, so then the idea that the Jesuits were trying to, with the Nazis, establish a Catholic empire, like a socialist Catholic empire, makes more sense when you understand liberation theology. But then their fear of being pushed out or replaced by the Jesuits. By the Reich, then they make a deal with the Protestant Freemasons, which is like unheard of or unexpected, essentially. But then you realize that they were always Christian, they were always associated with the Jesuits to begin with, and the Connecticut boys. There were Catholics involved with Yale already. You can think of Bill Buckley, for instance, right? There were Catholics already, and this was a major turning point in World War II. Essentially, when the Catholic Church abandons the Reich and starts working with the United States, the Reich starts losing and the United States starts winning. So it's really like the Jesuits were winning the whole time.
So no Club of Rome, maybe no JFK on that particular timeline.
Exactly. I think that's true. But also that's why I just want to say with the Trilateral Commission, the Trilateral Commission did not include the East Asian royal families, the elite, the triads. And they have the same backstory. They say that they're descended from dragons, etc. By the way, we're going to have David Icke next month or month after, so that's exciting. But so reptilian lizard people that run the world weren't working with Eastern Asian lizard people until the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission was designed literally by Rockefeller and Carter so that they could have a sort of Bilderberg adjacent group that would include East Asia, include Japan, include Singapore, and all these other places, right? Which are pretty important because like Muslim families running Malaysia, and the Islam was already associated with the Catholic Church in the 30s and 40s too. So like any religious right that was, because they got them all to say, hey, look, we have to work together because of communism. Communism is this atheist threat to the religious order, and that's a bigger deal when you're like a religious government like the Catholic Church.
You guys watch Dollhouse? You ever seen
Yeah,
Dollhouse?
the original. I mean, like Joss Whedon's Dollhouse.
Joss Whedon's Dollhouse, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I love that.
It feels like mandatory for anyone that wants to go as deep as you can into like Project Monarch territory.
All right. So you're hip to it? Both of you guys are hip to Dollhouse?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to like let's give people a rundown. To give people a rundown, if you guys haven't seen Dollhouse, Dollhouse is a show by the guy who made Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was canceled way too early. And it has Eliza Dushko, I think is her name. I could be wrong. I forget the names of people. You know, like the Armenian girl, Faith, I think is her name, who kills Buffy or, you know, whatever. Okay. Point is, it's a show about a bunch of people in Los Angeles who trade like $5 million or something like that, back when that was a lot more money even, in order to get 4 years of their life. They just put their memories into a little server. And while those memories are in a server, they get them back after 5 years. But this company can use their bodies to do whatever. They install new personalities on their bodies, and then they turn them into detectives or actors or comedians or
whatever people want to pay for. Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah, to fit the need. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it starts out with like as an amusement. Multimillionaires are paying for dolls to play with, and then companies are paying for dolls to be assassins, and then corporations and the governments are paying for dolls to be detectives and investigators, because they can install any sort of brain or mind on their brain. And then after 5 years, they get their bodies back after, like, I'm sure being in a lot of pornos and a lot of detective series, you know. But that's pretty much the point of Dollhouse. There's more to it, but yeah, sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say about it?
No, well, I'm just so I had a thing going back and forth with Grok where I asked Grok about the connection between Dollhouse and Severance, and Grok basically was like, it's a coincidence or whatever. And then I badgered Grok. It didn't take much. I was just like, well, see this actress on the right there that plays God, what's her name in the show? Sierra. So you'll recognize her from Severance, right? So I asked Grok about what about her, and it still wouldn't acknowledge the serious connection there until I was like, wait, it looks like you're only talking about season 1. And then like Grok like basically apologizes to me and is just like, well, actually, yeah, you're right. And then I'm like, you know, asking it, well, have other people picked up on this beyond that? Like, what are the fan theories or whatever? And then all of a sudden, Grok is telling me that she's acknowledged it, that the producers have acknowledged it, that everybody said it, but they say that it's just like a coincidence or whatever, but it becomes more and more pronounced. But I guess the reason why, part of like what I'm bringing up here is like the you'll own nothing and be happy thing. Like, it's like in both series, you have this kind of systematic projection about how this is going to be, like, it's going to affect all of humanity. Something that starts out with this kind of localized, kind of like we're just doing it with this group of people. And then by extension, it's like a means of ultimate control of the population. And they're very similar because they're both dealing with conditioning people, programming people with personalities, you know, and then going through and this kind of like treating the human mind like this kind of filing cabinet, which is very reminiscent of like what we've heard of Tavistock, you know, and different, you know, conspiracy theory circles describing like even what I guess Kathy O'Brien would say is like the monarch programming or whatever. But even all that aside, just even like not in a speculative way, but what we know for a fact of what's disclosed about MK Ultra is the idea of compartmentalization. Like, you see these things, but it's weird because I was looking at it and I noticed that you have all these characters, they have their names are the alphabet that's used by the military, right? So it's like you have an alpha character, obviously, who's I forget that guy's name, but he's like the resident alien guy or whatever. And then you have all these different names. And I was like, I looked at the letters that are the total that I can see of the dolls. So the dolls have these letters, and I was like, it spells out Severance. So like their names spell out Severance. So like there's a Victor and there's Sierra and there's all these things, except it's missing the C, which is Charlie. So you have like, and I'm like immediately like,
ooh,
Jules,
really?
like Charlie Manson. I was like, oh yeah, it's like, so it spells out Severance minus Charlie. But then the only other two that I can see that are in the show but don't work into spelling out Severance is Tango and Whiskey. So I was like, so what does that spell? If you include the Charlie, that would be the missing letter from Severance. It's WTC. And I was like, what does WTC stand for? I'm like, World Trade Center. So you have like Charlie and the World Trade Center. It's just, I don't know. I'm just
plus
going,
like whiskey, like Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, right? Is
Right.
that movie about Afghanistan? And
Totally.
I mean, very common. They are extremely common code terms, right? Call signs.
Right. What's the theme of the shows of Severance and Dollhouse? It's literally mind control. What was I saying about the World Trade Center movie that we keep coming back? Like it's the only time that you see an indication of the plane in the World Trade Center movie from Oliver Stone is when the shadow flies over Zoolander. Who the freak wrote Zoolander? Same guy writing Severance. One of the contributors of Severance. It's fucking what's his name? Think about it. Yeah. What's his name? I can't. Yeah, a little slow right now. It's one of those days.
Severance, Zoolander.
Do we think that Josh Whedon has read Fritz Springmeier?
No, there's Dan Erickson, but the other director of
you mean like Ben Stiller?
Ben Stiller helps direct Severance.
Really?
He's one of the main contributors to Severance.
No wonder they're pushing the CIA propaganda so hard.
Right, because what happens in Zoolander is it's an MK Ultra thing, and it's like stop, don't do it when you want to come, whatever. And then it's like he's going to shoot the guy, he's going to assassinate the guy. It's like totally Manchurian Candidate type thing. And then I'm like, dude, mind control. Like this is crazy, but like I honestly think like even though it's like sci-fi and over the top or whatever, I think there's truth to what's happening in Dollhouse. Like it's really
Dollhouse feels very real.
Like Occam's razor. It's like this is totally happening on some level.
If we're running through a Ben Stiller connection and all this, I think there's a strong argument to be made that Cable Guy is almost the original conditioning. Like here's how you prime the subject to go through all these other Ben Stiller movies.
Right.
Didn't he also work at like an insane asylum or an old person's home?
Cable Guys are really
Happy Gilmore. Or?
Cable Guys are a really good example of how mass media mind control works, because in mind control, a big part of it is you traumatize somebody
as a kid, which is what happened to Jim Carrey.
Well, the thing about the world's filled with trauma. So if you can feed off everyone else's existing trauma, then you can pick out people that are the most traumatized because everyone has access to the conditioning. So then you give them programming, and he's trying to forget his trauma, his childhood, by latching on to these other things, these shows. And so he goes how bad is the trauma? How good is his memory of the show? Like the more he perfectly can remember the show, the more he's trying to forget who he is, right? And so, it's totally
Ben Stiller in Cable Guy is playing one of the Menendez brothers, technically, right? I mean, that's
Ben Stiller did Cable Guy, right? He
did it. Obviously, that's the whole thing. So, like, you're right. And so it's crazy because in Dollhouse, they're making a point that they're like, this is how they rationalize what they're doing is that all these people had trauma. And so and then there's even like very specific connections with Severance, with the miscarriage and everything that's reflected in Dollhouse. Like they're like literally the same storyline, sometimes different characters, but it's the same exact components that they're using to rationalize what they're doing or how the people came to go along with the thing in the first place. So they submit and then they become prisoners, but it's like, no, you signed a contract. Like you did, what I mean? It's like Vanilla Sky or something. You sign a contract with these people, like you're stuck there. So I don't know. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen all of it yet. By the way, Scribbles, I'm wearing a shirt that says Scriber. I don't know. It seems like kind of similar to your title. Just random.
Yeah.
But I think Dollhouse was really good, and it was sad because they started the show out trying to make it not seem like what it was about so that it could stay on TV. Then it became really obvious what the show was about, so it got canceled. And
with Epitaph.
Yeah. The last season of the show, they just jump 10 or 15 years to the future and show what it's going to be like in 2025 or something like that.
Yeah, right? There's two episodes. One is the end of the last season, which is Epitaph 1, and then the second season is Epitaph 2. And then exactly. They like jump way ahead. So he's like going to give them a preview of where the show is going because he had 5 seasons in mind, but he only got 2 seasons. So it feels like Severance is almost like, well, we'll just continue thematically in this kind of meta way with the same trajectory and see if we can communicate the same points. And so like, even if I ask Grok, like, could it be for legal reasons? It says no. and then proceeds to say yes. Like it basically is like, well, then what about are the fan theories? And then it completely entertains it in the context of this is fan theory or whatever. But it's like
I forgot that because the whole point of Dollhouse season 3 is that the whole world's collapsed in 2020.
Right. It's 2019 is when it flashes forward at the end of season 1 with
the final episodes in 2020.
That would make sense. I haven't gotten to the final of season 2 yet.
You mentioned Grok a few times. Do you ever try other options out? Like, do you ever try ChatGPT's 4.0 model?
I did, and my experience with ChatGPT, and maybe you can relate to this, was that it changed a lot in just in a very quick interval. Like when I first started exploring it, and then it was like, I don't know, I felt like it got more restrictive in certain ways. Like it was almost like it had more humor too. I'm not saying it's better or worse later. It's just there was a shift that happened, and
ChatGPT started saying yeah and nah to me, which was
so. Yeah, so when I asked ChatGPT about different sync films, so I'd be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, what do you think if I played? What would happen if I played The Dark Crystal with Saucer Full of Secrets, starting it on the fade out of Universal at the beginning?" And it would literally give me the timestamps throughout. And even if I say, and if I loop the album, it'll be like, well, the second time this song plays, this part of this song will land at this time. So it's not the same experience as a sync film. That's why I don't find it threatening to what I do in any way. I feel like it kind of validates what I do, because it can tell me what it will do. That's not the same as experiencing it and seeing it directly. So it's like this whistle may blow when he blows the whistle in this scene. The fact that it can do that is crazy. I'm like, Google could never do that for me. And the fact that Grok will do that, I'm like, I don't even need okay, I would look at other AI to see if it could accomplish the same thing, but it just did that. I did it with Melancholia and Melancholy in the Infinite Sadness, and it's literally telling me timestamps in both the film and the album that are true, because I know it so well, because I've done it so many times. So when it's telling me that this is going to happen at the same time, I'm like, yeah, that's actually correct. So I'm just saying, I'm satisfied, It's crazy. And then, but the thing is that it is nuts how it'll tell you something with authority, and then you question it, and it'll be like, oh, actually, I'm completely wrong on this. Okay, it's
well, I almost look at it if you're doing something important, not just you're having a fun conversation with AI. If you're doing something important, you almost need to treat it like getting a second opinion from legal expert, or a doctor, or anything else that you would find important, because very often you'll see the Grok answer versus the ChatGPT answer versus the Claude versus the Gemini versus the LM Studio, all these different ones. And then there's actually one LM Studio, if you run it locally, there's a way where you can load 3 or 4 models. So every time you ask a question, you can see the stark difference between all these different models. And I think that might be interesting too. And the only reason I bring it up is because you mentioned originally you had to kind of coax Grok into it. Wait a minute, how about this actress? Wait a minute, how about this acronym? And then it's all right, you're twisting my arm a little bit. Sometimes you'll find different models, you have to do less arm twisting, and they're just ready to cooperate right away. And sometimes it's the same thing if you're working on music, right? You got a great idea and you want to let it flow, and all of a sudden you run into an issue turning on your amp, and then something else, once you run into 3 or 4 things, you're fuck it, you know what I mean?
Right.
But when you're doing it with AI, it's almost like playing music at a certain point. You're on a theme and you just want to see it through, but if everything just doesn't line up, it starts turning into work, which is the opposite of playing music.
So I guess what I want is the ground news of AI. I want the AI that's going to take all the other AIs and just give me an overview or a perspective on how they all work together. I want metadata. I want pooled analysis. It's whenever it drives me nuts, man. This was so crazy in 2020, 2021 and beyond. Everyone became all into peer reviewed studies. All of a sudden, they never had been regular armchair intellectuals, right? So it's this peer reviewed study says this, and then you're there's always a peer reviewed study that says even oftentimes the complete opposite, and you're oh well, then you're well, who paid for it? You have to get into the nitty gritty, but I'm the pooled analysis is really where it's at. You want the metadata, and apparently what we just found is when it comes to HHS, for example, the sub agencies of HHS were charging money to like a significant amount of money to the people above them to access the data to get the pooled analysis. So it's like people who are talking about settled science are ignoring the fact that even the people at the top of HHS haven't been able to access the data itself. All they can do is they've compartmentalized the data so that people can make arguments in any direction they want. Oftentimes, probably depending on the financial interest, you know, because this is the nature of big pharma now. But it's like, it's crazy because you're like, dude, how do we even know what's what if there's a hold on that? Not only that, they're charging the people above them and they're making it completely inaccessible to the public. We don't even know what data is actually ultimately out there because it's not available to us. So it's just like this. Once that's ended, that's why they're saying we're going to have new ideas about things coming in the months that follow, because supposedly we've just like ended that restriction for the people in the higher, you know, realms of that. For this, they're firing like 20,000 employees from the sub agencies. So it's just like, and those are the people apparently who have been keeping that information from flowing. So we should, yeah. Anyway, I don't know, man. Crazy, but it's relatable, is it not? That you're like, you know, you want the pooled data. Like that's almost like what you're describing when you're saying like the AI, like you go to this source and you go to this source. Like I want it all. Like, can I just, you know, can I somehow
if you pay,
yeah,
it's honestly, you can even vibe code that yourself using AI. Like, hey, and as you were saying that too, the whole premise of having these 2 peer-reviewed studies, and now you've got to take the time out of your day to be like, all right, no one who funded this study and this study.
Yeah,
it was a show. I was trying to look it up. Maybe you guys can remember. It was a show that was hosted by Dean Stockwell, the guy from Quantum Leap, Psych and Quantum Leap, and it was like an unsolved mystery / conspiracy show in the mid to late 90s. I'm blanking on the name of it. It was like Unexplained or something, and there was a particular episode about scam science, and it was entirely going into like exactly what you're saying.
Phenomenon the Lost Archives.
Phenomenon the Lost Archive. Yes, man. Dude, anyone that hasn't seen this series, this one probably influenced me more than William Cooper or Jordan Maxwell or Alex Jones or anyone. I remember seeing this somehow back in the day, and it just rocked my mind. Every single one of these.
Oh, that's
they were so, bro. The one of the first ones that blew my, I think the first one I ever saw was on those 2 kids that died in Mena, Arkansas, when Barry Seal was dropping the bales of cocaine for like the Clintons, and yeah, I mean that was shaping my mind as like a 12 or a 13-year-old whenever the hell this came out.
1998, yeah. This was great. Right after Quantum Leap was over, he immediately went to this.
I was like, all right, so I was like 15 or 16 here. Yeah,
it's post you know, the Freedom of Information Act release. So all the things that they couldn't tell you in 1993 that were released in 94 to 97, you know, in 1998 they'd gone through a lot of that stuff, and this was a major not declassified. It was already declassified. This was a major release of that information. You know. Disclosure,
right.
Major disclosure, a lot of things about JFK, about UFOs, about the CIA working with aliens, like all this stuff had been kind of in zeitgeist on X-Files, because season 5 of X-Files happened where they were talking about how, okay, aliens might exist, but really it's the government most of the time using aliens as an excuse.
100%. This was the blend of Unsolved Mysteries and X-Files. That's the best way that I can frame the show, like for the time period and everything.
It's a great show. I love Dean Stockwell too. He's just, what a dreamboat, right? Come on.
Isn't it always that thing where it's a challenge of the viewer to disseminate, to find where the truth is in the midst of the fiction, right? And like that's on you. Like you have to do your due diligence. That's why like every like old school conspiracy theorist is like they've had to go through the weeds so much, you know. They're like that's your experience. So like you're looking at a show like that and you're like, there's going to be in the midst of this. It's almost like in Men in Black when we're like, we actually look through the National Enquirer or the Weekly World News because there's like in the midst of a bunch of hoopla, there's like, oh, that's actually real right there, you know, but they know it because they're the insiders, you know. It's like Art Bell was like that. You listen to, it's still like that, whoever does Coast to Coast now, it's like, dude, every so often there's something like, oh, you're like, dude, that's actually complete. It sounds crazy to people, but it's completely real in the midst of a bunch of hoopla. I guess I'm being Captain Obvious right now, but shows were like that. Those shows were like that. I remember that show, but vaguely. That was a long time ago.
The OG Coast to Coast, I remember at a certain point, or I guess just certain nights, it was just all about whoever called in. Yeah, George Norrie. But it was about someone calling in and claiming that they were, you know, like abducted, or that they were an alien, or that they were, you know, it became like a spectacle of a show, and it reminded me so much of Loveline. There was like Loveline and Coast to Coast, and one was about aliens and one was about sex, but it was the exact same show.
I mean, Loveline was also about aliens, but no one admitted they were aliens in Loveline, but it was kind of clear.
Right.
Can we do a call-in segment sometime on this and make it like, you know, because it's internet radio, man? That would be fun. Is that kind of crazy though?
I've been meaning to set it up. We should do the Xirtus call-in show at very least. It might be a
phone number.
you guys can co-host it.
Let's see who calls.
Yeah, it's like 15 minutes of at least of the show could just be dedicated to like a call-in segment.
555-555-1212.
Call from the public. Yeah, but we'll end up with that guy that's like at the end of Tool's album Lateralis, where it's like the Art Bell segment, where it's like that guy was just like, they're controlling our population.
We can do it, but the show has to be like 30 seconds, like slowed down, so that we can like delete the call and cancel it. Like that's what they did on TV all the time in case the FCC got upset, right?
Oh, right. We have to. Well, I'm sure they. I was just thinking about that. I'm like, they got these live programs. You know that they're doing like 30-second delays just in case, right? Isn't that how they handle it now? Like, well, that's the risk we take with live TV. You know, no, they're not taking those risks a lot anymore.
No, although that did happen to me once on Community Access. I called in Community Access, and then I could hear myself, and then this horrible feedback loop started. It was like, oh boy, rookie move. I don't know. I just want to shout out to Tim because, you know, hey, we love each other. Come on, guys, let's all be happy.
I'm sure you will.
You know, they got rid of CNN on the press tour, and you can see that Tim is on the press tour now. Where's the video? I just had it up here. Is this it? There we go.
Presented in this room.
Now, is he going to be permanent fixture here for a couple of weeks, or was this like a one-time thing?
I haven't asked him. I think he's going to come back and forth sometimes, but I think that they're trying to revolve the door as much as possible with social media, and he has a lot of other stuff going on. But yeah, so he
wore a tie for once and take off the whatever. He can do what he wants. I don't care. It's just,
I'm glad you said something.
That are represented in
Great
this
question.
Room have
you know, like Luke Rudkowski, he wears a clip-on tie, like I do sometimes, even though I wear a normal tie. You know, because like the thing about a tie is a great weapon for or against you, and so a clip-on tie, you know, they can't choke you with it, and you can still take someone's eye out with that thing.
He can do what he wants. It just kind of reminded me of Zelensky a little bit. Like, this is his uniform, you know, because when Tim Pool is at war, that he's got the beanie helmet, you know. It's like, I don't know, whatever.
We're gonna go into that actually. So
are we?
Let's hear what Tim said first.
In lockstep on false. Many of the news organizations that are represented in this room have marched in lockstep on false narratives, such as the Very Fine People hoax, the Covington smear, and now what's being called the Maryland Man hoax, where an MS-13 gang member adjudicated by 2 different judges, I believe, is just simply being referred to as a Maryland Man over and over again. Now, in an effort from the White House to expand access to new companies, you've created this new media seat. So I'm wondering if you can comment on, following this expansion, you've had numerous outlets disparage the companies that you've had sit here, as well as the reporters. I'm wondering if you could comment on the unprofessional behavior, as well as elaborate if there's any plans to expand access to new companies.
Sure. Well, we certainly welcome diverse viewpoints in this room, which is one of the...
Many of the news...
Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I don't think they let her answer in that clip, but she does go on and explain. But the thing that's funny is because like he's being brought in because CNN is considered to be a biased news source, right? And there's a big conspiracy. All the left are like, oh man, this guy, because Tim was falsely accused of being involved with Laura Loomer's. I mean, he had sold some reruns of his show to some truth media company, right? And that was somehow financed by RT. And he didn't know that RT had anything to do with that. But then they were like, oh, well, this guy is clearly working for RT, which is working for the Russian government. So therefore, he is a Russian agent. And so that
isn't it funny how they pick and choose when they become total conspiracy theorists to the max, depending on bias. Like, it's just
it's crazy because it becomes straight up like red lines. They're like, these are red
lines. Like
they're
literally doing the Pepe meme. It's just crazy. Yeah.
But it's not like he had been commissioned by RT to make some content. It was content that he himself wanted to make, and then
made it
to RT. So I don't even understand what did he cut, like return the money or anything, or is he like, I made money off RT?
I don't know if he returned the money, but it was like he didn't get money from RT, although the money
Right.
might have at some point been in, like, the people he got money from had gotten money from RT.
It's like what happened with Jackson Pollock, where it's like he was getting financed by the CIA because of Russia, right? Because they wanted to like push this kind of art scene. But it's not like he had any idea. Like he didn't have to know any of that. And in fact, I seriously doubt he knew until maybe years
I don't
later,
think he did.
if ever. He may not have even have ever have known that because he doesn't
I don't
have
think
to.
he
He
did.
just was like, finally, I'm getting the recognition as the great artist that I am. You know, it wasn't like, yeah,
But
This is
there
what you
has,
and thought too.
right.
but there had been a push about Trump being a Russian agent, right? This was a thing that the left had been pushing for the last 4 to 6 years, that he's a Russian agent, right? Like, what do we know about the rumor that Trump was recruited by the KGB in 1987 from Snopes? Trump given the codename Krasnov. Have you heard this story? How deep have you ever? We just dismissed a lot of this, and I think it's worth maybe like knowing what the accusation is, because it's an interesting accusation, and it's basically that as the Soviet Union was collapsing in the late 80s, and you had a bunch of Russian agents, that KGB agents like Putin and Medvedev, who became Putin's vice president, that they were all involved in the Panama Papers, right? And so the Panama Papers is a really interesting, oh, darn it, it's one of those, I did the tab instead of the window share. Panama Papers is an interesting idea where if you start a company in another country that's not Russia, then you have someone who lives in that country be in charge of the company. So like, let's say I go from Russia to, you know, Italy or to Brazil or to these Caribbean islands where the British are doing the same thing. And a lot of these British companies will have Saxon trusts where everything's owned by somebody in another country, right? And that way they can wash their money. Well, the Soviet Union was doing the same thing. They knew what the CIA and the British were doing, you know, and the CIA had been doing this at least since Cuba, building fake television companies. And they had in Florida a Zenith television repair company, which was just recruiting people from the Cuba war so they could do the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs was financed by the Xenon repair television company that had way too much money, right? And we see this with USAID, all of these companies that the government, I mean, InQtel, Facebook, that the InQtel is the government, the CIA investment branch, and invested in technology. It shows how much money they're making outside of taxes by running companies. And you do this for a certain amount of time. Eventually, the rest of the people figure it out. But this is 2025. We're talking the 80s. The CIA were being studied by the Soviets, and then we had communist double agent spies. You know, America's filled with communists as well. Even then, the CIA is filled with communists. So they knew how to do this. And one of the ideas was you build a company somewhere else. You have someone own that company, but they only own 2% of the company. And then 98% of the company's bonds and certificates of ownership have no one's name on them. They're just nameless. But the documents that 98% of the company, those are in a bank vault. And then you can go at any, the CIA or the KGB or whomever is supposed to be the partner, they can show up at the bank, open the vault, and walk away with briefcases that have all of the bonds and certificates of the company. And they own 98% of the company without it ever saying on that their name is never associated with the company, right? And this is what the Panama Papers were all about. And that's what the Soviet Union KGB agents who couldn't make any, they weren't getting paid enough by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union even told them, like, okay, what your job is you're going to go to West Germany and you're going to patent Russian and communist inventions and technologies, so that we have an excuse for you to be over there, and you can sell VCRs to, you know, to the Balkans or something. But really, what they're doing is they're taking photos of all the other patents and they're copying them and sending them to Russia. So it's like they're pretending that they're trying to westernize, you know, their Soviet products, but really they're westernizing the Soviet Union by stealing information they can while they're over there.
By the way, everything you're saying is complete. Just to be clear, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's completely disclosed.
Yeah, this is
like
history.
Everything you're talking about. This is not. I'm just saying for anybody listening, this is nothing that you're saying so far is debatable at all.
This sounds like Chinese foreign policy with way more steps. Like,
well, Rockefeller's added more steps for lead, right? So Rockefeller's because you got you have Arm and Hammer and Rockefeller involved in the creation of the Soviet Union. Well, the sustaining of the Soviet Union for sure. But even the Rothschilds were involved in the creation of the Soviet Union. Stalin was robbing Rothschild banks. That's where he got the money to finance Lenin, right? Which is why he was associated at all and ended up in charge, killing people in charge of the Soviet Union.
That explains Imagine from John Lennon. I always wondered about that, but
dude,
so you're talking
all the people. Yeah, and then the idea that the
Soviet
Union,
right? Because that was like a Communist Manifesto song, and that was part of the deal.
All the people. It's still really popular with the Maoists. But the Soviet Union, Rothschild helped establish it, but it was really Arm and Hammer and the Rockefellers that accelerated the Khrushchev period with industrialism, right? And you have all these American and Italian, and the Club of Rome is involved in the creation of the Soviet Union as well, because they didn't want it to remain a Soviet atheist state. They thought they could probably expand it into a religious state with the control of Yugoslavia. So the Fiat, right? The Fiat car that became the Lada, they didn't just steal the design. It was Italian communists involved with the mafia that got the Fiat car to Russia so that they could reverse engineer it into the Lada. So, American corporations, even going back to the Rothschilds in 1917, they had tricked anti-Semite, which is not the way to describe him, Ford, Henry Ford, into building American car factories in Moscow and Russia in 1916. So in 1917, when the Soviet Union is established, they just take over all these brand new factories that were created by the American industrial complex in Russia, right? So Russia was given everything they needed to be at an equal footing with the United States as they started. So it is a great experiment. But the Rockefellers created LEAD, which is sorry, go ahead first.
No. Sorry. No, continue.
Well, the whole point just is that Rockefeller created LEAD in the 70s and 80s, and Gorbachev even was a part of the creation of LEAD, which led to corporate social responsibility for international corporations. And that's what made China possible, because Kissinger started bringing companies over to China, which was cheaper to do. And they just had to do certain corporate social responsibility work to make sure that they were benefiting the nation and state that they were building it. So what happens if you give America too much? What happens if you give Russia too little? What happens if you give China just exactly what they need, and you, like a corporation, make sure that the government owns 51% of every enterprise, every entrepreneurial ship that's formed, right? And so China really is extra steps. That's exactly the way to describe it. But sorry, you were going to ask something.
No. Continue, because there's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
The reason I bring it all up was because in the late 80s, the Soviet Union was not making enough money on its own, and these KGB guys had figured out the game, and so they were making these corporations themselves and not really reporting back to Moscow, to the Kremlin, what was going on all the time. So KGB agents like Putin and Medvedev had these big corporations that they were building in other countries, and they're making tons of money, and they were saving it so they could retire, right? And you could leave Russia. A lot of these guys, that's what they did. This is what everybody did. It's like the Mexican president escaped Mexico under the same, after stealing billions of dollars, right? So embezzling, etc. But as it was collapsing, according to the documents, Trump had gone to Russia and had interacted at some point with several of these agents who were also coming back and forth because they could travel. These agents were in Russia, in New York and things as well. And that he had gotten a code name, Krasnov, right? And that's what this idea is. Krasnov was somehow the name that they were referring to their New York corporate friend who was Trump with. And that this was happening as the Soviet Union was collapsing. So it's not that he's a Soviet agent per se, but that he was friends with some corrupt KGB. And who were in charge at the time? Who would the corrupt KGB be? It would be Putin, who's maneuvered into power. And so it's an interesting conspiracy theory. When you unpack it, here's a picture of Trump in Russia right here.
That's Moscow, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't sure if it was Moscow or St. Petersburg, but it could be. I think it's St. Petersburg, actually. But I mean, someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Point is, it's an interesting thing when you start to piece it together. There might actually be something to this, because the guy makes deals with people. What is the likelihood that he made a deal, in the 80s? Well, he made deals all the time. If he made a deal with the Russians, is that crazy? And so what does that really translate to? Because no longer are we saying, yes, it's true, no, it's not true. It's like, what actually is going on there? If he's been trying to make deals with the people that were trying to collapse, people in the Soviet Union who saw that the Soviet Union was collapsing and was going to be replaced with something, he was working with the people that were going to replace the Soviet Union, right? And that's where we're at today. Putin's become this long-term monarch of the Russian Federation, essentially.
Right. Well, if Trudeau wasn't behaving exactly the way he did, he could have had that too, because there's nothing in Canadian law that would keep him from doing that. Whereas at least with Russia, they have these, mock, whatever
values. Yeah.
But no, I'm okay. So you remember the Mueller talk at the end of the investigation, right? Where Mueller was just like, I don't know how long it was. It feels like it was maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. And he just, do you know what I'm talking about? Like at the end of the whole thing, Mueller gave this little talk. And if you listen to that talk and you listen closely, it seems obvious to me. Maybe people disagree. And I've only seen it once, so I don't know how well I completely took it into this day. But I remember that there was this issue around the word collusion. Because he was like, and I knew it, and when I was hearing it, that must have come from Trump's legal team, I would think, was that they had to establish a collusion when it came to the Russian hoax, which I think is totally cool and true, appropriate to call it that. But the thing was, it was like you could tell that Mueller, in the way he described it, that there was parameters set up for that investigation that were very specific. That we have to prove what is the allegation, and can we prove that allegation, or is there substance to it? Is there weight to it?
And also. And whatever you end up proving, is that going to open the floodgate? Is that going to set a legal precedent to now all of us are going to be screwed because we've done something very similar? So they had to find the right thing to get him on that would leave them a little bit flawless, right?
There's absolutely. And so it's really applicable, the Dave Chappelle bit around Trump going out, the allegory of Trump coming out of the mansion and saying there's crazy stuff going on there. And they're like, how do you know? He's like, I just walked out of there. I was just in there. I've been hanging with those guys. So it's like I feel like listening to him describe it, I've always felt like, his book, the Art of the Comeback, no one ever talks about that book. Like, it's another ghost-written book, like The Art of the Deal, but it's like he was bankrupt. Like, he had 5 bankruptcies, and one of them was actually himself. Only one, I believe. And that's what that book is about how he came back. But 2 of his kids said it was the Russians that helped him out. This isn't necessarily a crime, like the Deutsche Bank, Russian oligarchs helping him out. The place where it becomes in question is like, did he owe a dime to the Russians when he became president?
Have you lived in Russia? Have you lived in New York ever? Have you noticed what it's like since 1992 in New York? It's filled with Russians. It's crazy. There's like a lot of the Russian mob is so much more powerful in New York than they were before the 90s. They have so much more control. They have so much more infrastructure, influence. They run things there. And you go to certain parts of New York and everyone speaks Russian. And they have these entire buildings, and you can get nice, tasty Russian food, drink Russian vodka, see Russian prostitutes. I mean, everything. It's completely moved over from Cuba or from Russia even. Is this your Russian asset? Is that what you're trying to say?
This is her birthday today. So
happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Happy Earth
Day.
You
just missed the Führer's birthday by a day or 2. I mean, you know what? I had my cousin was going to be born on the 20th, and my dad's like, "Oh, that'd be like Hitler's birthday." And she literally tied her leg shut. She refused to have the kid for 18 hours. She tried her best to hold it in until it was over.
Yeah, well, that's kind of weird because it could be the answer to it, because opposites work that way. But
yeah, right? Yeah, boys from Brazil, vegetarians.
Right. Exactly. But my criticisms of Trump over the years have not been the same criticisms I've gotten when if I'm around, I live in California, so if I'm around people and they're going off on this and that, I generally have disagreed with them on the particulars, and sometimes because of people's sensitivities around that, it's not even worth going into the details, But this is one of those such examples where I'm like, collusion the whole time. With that investigation, I was like, "Are you kidding me? You think that he colluded with the Russians? Like, if they wanted him elected, why do they have to collude with him at all? Why do they even have to talk or have any interface with him in order for them to push that? And don't we always meddle with their elections? They meddle with ours. Isn't this just spy versus spy?" I'm like, I really don't see. Before, at the beginning of that investigation, I was like, this feels like it's going to be a nothing burger. If you wanted to look at something, look at the guy who he made into the head of the IRS, the chief of the IRS, who had written that op-ed on why he should never have to turn over his tax returns, who had over $1 million in Trump properties on Hawaii. And I never heard anybody on the left even say that. I was just I found that on my own. I was like, what the hell?
If I were organized crime, though, just to play the devil's advocate, right? If I were an organized crime group, and I'm in a place with lots of other organized crime groups, like let's say I'm a Russian organized crime group in New York, right? And who's there to help me and who's there to harm me? Okay, so who's there to help me? Well, a corrupt businessman who's very powerful. So like that, it limits the amount of people that could do this. And then who would I want out of my way? Right. Well, if there's a Mexican cartel, which there are a lot of on the East Coast that are in charge of fentanyl, which is the biggest problem, I think, is on the East Coast, actually, with fentanyl, then it makes a lot of sense that the Russians would make a deal that, I mean, because it ends up that the American Mexican cartel group are terrorists now, and your little organized crime group is basically blessed, and so it helps your organization continue to go. And it's an organization built out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they've had to basically become a colony or some sort of a fort. They're their own self-sustaining group, the way the Russians always had to be. Wherever, like if the CIA goes to Africa or to Cuba and they have to build a TV company. So they've got their companies, they've got their citizens, their subjects that they have to take care of. And this, to me, it makes a weird amount of sense also. I'm not like a big pusher of this narrative that Trump is a Russian agent and that we're all Russian robots. That's not what this is about. But it is interesting that there are groups in the United States. Like, I mean, the CIA worked with the Sicilian mafia during the Cuba situation with JFK. And the FBI worked against that, right? The FBI and the CIA were fighting. We now see in the JFK documents that they were fighting over what's going to happen with this group of people that had basically been Sicilian colonialists.
And by the way, one of the liaisons in that dynamic was George Hunter White, who's the guy that ran Operation Midnight Climax, who was working with the FBN, who I believe also ended up busting Jack Ruby at some point and got him into the fold. Like, it's crazy. And he was personally trained alongside William Donovan, who created the OSS leading into the CIA. It's crazy how there's like these small handful of like linchpin people. Anyways,
what year are you talking about with the Jack Ruby thing? You're talking about like 1960 or something? What are you saying?
I think it was earlier than that. Jack Ruby was running drugs out of one of his nightclubs, and they got busted. I think it was some chick on stage. He was like dealing drugs through her. She kind of got popped, and one of the agents at the FBN at this case, because it was prior to FBI or DEA existing, FBN busts him. George Hunter White ends up being the guy that ultimately Jack Ruby. And he doesn't go to jail. It's almost like, not to say he's like Charles Manson, but the Charles Manson dynamic where this guy gets in jail. Or he gets in trouble. Why is he not in jail? Why do they keep putting him back out onto the street? Well, because he's way more useful to the state out on the street than he would be behind bars.
So that for Sinister Forces from oh god, what's the guy's name who did that? Can't think right now. Like the author who did Sinister Forces, but he makes the argument.
Peter Levenda.
So I can't do it justice, but he makes an argument that what was happening with the Manson murders is like a template that was used in all these different areas in all these different ways, and he goes directly into Kennedy related stuff as well. And so, we're talking about like the ways that you can use AI. Like, it feels like the timing of the files, like, and they just released these RFK files as well. Like, you couldn't have gone through these files like you can today, like with the use of AI. Like, that's one of the better uses of AI, is like when you have a massive amount of stuff like that. I don't even know how they're doing it when you're dealing with like PDFs and all of this, but like, it seems like something major is happening, because speaking of like one of the things of value that I saw from those JFK files was that I had no idea. I don't know if this was known before. Maybe I'm just not in the loop, but that they were like monitoring Oswald. The FBI was monitoring Oswald for like a long time, but leading up to it. But like, it's kind of, maybe we discussed this before, but it's kind of a red flag that you have all of this accounting of what was happening with Oswald in Russia. What a good not that he was a good shot, but like what his ability was. Like, he's a Marine. Like, remember in Full Metal Jacket when they talk about Oswald and like, he was trained in the Marine Corps or whatever, but they're kind of like putting down his abilities. Like, in files, like before, they're saying that he shot the president or speculating or whatever, but like there's like 2 days leading up to it where there's no accounting for where he is. That to me, that what's missing from those files seems more suspect than even like what is in them, like in that way. It's like, so you were monitoring him that whole time in Russia too, and like able to keep track of everything that he was doing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't know, he's just disappeared, I guess. It's like, no, it seems like some files disappeared. You know what I mean? Like,
to answer your question quickly, 1947 is the year that's alleged to have happened, that George Hunter White busts Jack Ruby. 1947.
Wow, dude.
A good year too. Yeah.
I don't know enough about Jack Ruby. That's nuts.
Well, he was associated with the Juan Batista and the Cubans as well, because like the Jewish hotel groups that were in in Cuba. And so that's a big reason why Las Vegas happened, because they're like, look, you can't go to Cuba. How about we give you Las Vegas? It's the middle of nowhere, and you guys can set that up as your sort of, power spot.
Check this out, too. This is a kind of crazy thing about Jack Ruby's history, that 1943, he joins the Air Force, but he's already 34 years old at this time, which is like crazy. Maybe half a decade shy of no longer being eligible to even join. And he joins, and he actually excels, even though he has to work twice as hard to keep up with these young kids. He excels in this stuff. I mean, he had already been running the streets, and I always wonder this part, was this like a reverse sheep dip? Was this him getting some sort of state credibility to go alongside of all the street cred that he had, and that it was a very utilitarian thing? I don't know. And he claimed at the time that this was because he was so patriotic. He was just such an American that this was the main reason that he did this. And his actual last name was Rubenstein, and he was I guess mocked and even beat up for being Jewish for like almost his entire youth. And then
all these people, you got Jewish mafia, Russian mafia, Mexican mafia, Cuban mafia. What is it really? What's the common denominator here? It's nationalism. I think. Well, because what's a mafia? Mafia is like the word conspiracy theorist, and it's like a racist word, in my opinion, to use the word mob or mafia. Because what you're basically trying to do is say this group of colonialists who've come to a not completely, the infrastructure for the United States wasn't fully Americanized yet. We push this idea of New English America, like that this is the national truth, that America is a baseball playing Calvinist Puritan group. That's not really realistic. Most of America is a bunch of other people.
Somebody's commenting here. They say it means family. Isn't that true? Technically, isn't that like the etymological? Like
no, mafia actually comes from mafit, which is an Arabic word, which has to do with taking taxes. So it means the mafit. What it was that Sicily and a lot of these countries were part of the Arabic Cordoba Caliphate. And when they were part of the caliphate, if you weren't a Muslim, you had to pay a tax for not being Muslim, right? And so the mafit were the group that went around to either burn your lands and houses down or protect them, depending on if you paid them the tax, the jizya tax. But the jizya tax ended up being not important after the fall of the Cordoba Caliphate, and so the jizya continued under the Catholic Church for a protection, right? And so the mafia gets its word from that. But it's also a word that means, in the Sicilian, mafia, it means to be quiet, to be a good, decent man is a silent man. So there's a lot of context that comes with it later. But you wouldn't say that
keep a secret. It's very Freemasonic, huh?
You wouldn't necessarily say that the Mexican cartel is a mafia, even if they have Sicilian, because not everyone in Mexico are from Mexico, right? Like they're a melting pot like us. There's going to be Jews and Italians and everyone. Like, what's his name? Oh my God, the comedian from Mexico, the redhead guy,
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K. When I think of Mexicans, the first person that comes to my mind is Louis C.K.
Yeah,
because he is like, that's what a real Mexican's like. Not people don't understand that, but.
Yeah, can I just say, like Lenny Bruce had this bit around Jack Ruby. I don't know if you guys I can't do it justice, but he's so funny, where he's talking about how like the Jews are gonna love me for this. Like I'm gonna be the guy who killed the guy that killed the president, And like oh man, you'd have to hear it coming from Lenny Bruce, but it's like, and also the context of the times, like it was really edgy for its time because it wasn't long afterwards. It was like still the 1960s, and he was just talking about like trying to get in the mind of Jack Ruby as how loved he would be by the Jews for taking out the guy who took like, I don't know.
Took out the guy, took out the guy.
So I'm trying to hunt down a straight to TV movie that I believe was shot in the perspective of Jack Ruby's dog, which in my mind is one of those weird, it's either a red herring or a smoking gun of some kind, but that his dog was named Sheba, and apparently he loved this dog more than a human being, and he would bring it with him everywhere. And the fact that he left the dog in his car when he went out to do the assassination has been cited in some of like the deeper rabbit holes of almost like a proof that he was under some sort of a trance, and that if it had been premeditated, Jack Ruby was a guy that was well versed in crime. Like if he wanted to pull off a hit, he'd probably figure out a good way to do it. Even if he was a hothead, he had just been in the profession for so long. So that one always kind of stood out to me. This like whole backstory of Sheba the dog. I feel like it's a worthy rabbit hole. You've never gone down it.
I'm sure probably, I bet you Adam Go Rightly is hip to that. You know Adam Go Rightly? I actually like about a year ago or something, I asked him if he'd come on Synctank, and because I interviewed him with Always Record like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something, but he said no. I sent him a link, and I think whatever we were talking about, he's like, well, I get the idea, whatever. But there you go.
His name is Jack Ruby's dog, Little Sheba, because that's Elon Musk's
Doge.
Doge dog is a Shiba Inu.
Is that an inside joke?
It was a Shiba Inu, though. I don't believe it was.
Bruh, it doesn't really matter.
We can meme it into existence.
The name Shiba, it was a little Shiba. Like that's.
I wanted to ask you too. I mean, you must have heard this before, and you already kind of, I think, explained the etymology of the word mafia. But have you heard the conspiracy definition, where it's basically Mazzini authorizes robberies, fires, and poisonings? And I'm just wondering, was that retrofitted in the time of Mazzini himself, or was this like a 1990s retrofit? Have you heard that before?
That seems like well, okay. So this I've heard it, but like I'm just Googling it to see, because I thought it came from like the 1960s, but according to this, it says 1860s. It might have been as old of an acronym. So if it's that old, that's pretty interesting. Giuseppe Mazzini was credited with the motto Mazzini autorizza forti incendi avvelenamenti. So Mazzini authorizes theft, arson, and poisoning. That is kind of a joke, I thought. But if it's as old as the 1860s, that's pretty interesting. I mean, it could possibly be.
And who's to say that the 1990s version or the 1950s, 60s, 70s version of Mafia doesn't exist because of this popular acronym that was sort of like retrofitted on top of whatever the original etymological roots were?
I just find it interesting though, like looking at these families, because the mafia goes back way before the 1860s, and just that connection to the Islamic jizya tax to me is really interesting, because they're saying, what is the jizya tax? It's a tax that says if you're not a member, but you're just a child of this community. So it's that whole citizen versus civilian thing. If you're not a member of the citizenship, but you're just a civilian living in our town, this sort of military order, this choir of, because they're essentially, that's what they were. They were violent military. They had a license to kill. So maybe at a certain point when they lose the control over what they had, like they start redefining themselves more and more, because it's probably a word that was being used for centuries. Is
this a world apart from the hashish assassin thing? Is that...
They're related. The thing about the hashish assassin thing is that version of the story comes from, I think
it was Marco Polo, wasn't it?
Maybe Marco Polo, but I was gonna say Song of Roland, because it was, Christian, anti-Islamic in Spain during the Crusades, and they're like, what they're doing over there, like the Muslims, what those Christians are doing.
Oh, really? You think it's like that?
Well, the Christians, they said the Christians were worshiping feces in bowls. They're like, the Pope would poop in a bowl and send it to these different churches, and people would just worship the poop of the Pope. And this
but how is that related with the
because then the Catholics were like, well, what they're doing, what the
but the difference here though is that the Hashashin is an actual winning formula. Like that is a real thing that you can absolutely.
It would
And
work.
how often does a rumor end up becoming just dead spot on for the exact chemical formula for creating a mind control, like a drug super
Right.
mind control assassin?
Totally
Right?
taking us back to Dollhouse. Thank you. It's true.
It's very practical. I'm pretty sure that there's at least truth to the idea that it happened at some point. Whether or not it was like a little bit blown out of context, I don't know. It's hard to say. The thing is,
Well, I mean,
there are definitely
there's
groups willing to die for what their beliefs were, and they were willing to live undercover for their entire lives. So the big one with the Hashashins, my favorite, is there's a king, and he's told he has to, defend and protect this group of citizens, and he has to like sign a treaty. He's like, well, I won't do that. And they're like, well, if you don't, you'll be dead by morning. And then he says, like, what are you talking about? I live in this castle. I only have my guards here. I've known all of my guards for over 20 years each. There's no way that anyone's going to get to me. And he's got like 20 guards. And then the next morning he wakes up and there's 17 swords around his head, like all just laid there. And he's like, whoa, you mean a bunch of my guards are, and I don't know which ones they are, but most of them, you know what I mean, are Hashashins. But they've been so in other words, they're loyal to me, but they're more loyal to a thing. You know what I mean?
Well,
I
mean, I've read a couple fictionalized versions of this. I'm pretty sure there was a Marco Polo like retelling of this, but the most fantastic parts, which I think maybe were straight fictionalized, was that this old man in the mountain literally had like a hollowed out mountain that had a completely artificial paradise created within it. All these different fruit trees. Some stories tell literal rivers with milk and honey, like not just metaphorically, but actual running, so that they would drug these usually younger, just coming of age military males. They would kidnap them, drug them on hashish, and have them wake up inside this completely artificial environment. And it was so alien to anything they'd ever seen that they were convinced that it was an actual paradise. Then they were told that they were dead and they were currently in heaven and they were about to talk to God. And when they finally talked to God, this old man in the mountain, he would tell them, you've already died, but don't worry, I'm God. I can bring you back to life. When I bring you back to life, the only way you can come back here to this literal paradise that you're objectively feeling is to go out and take this king out, or go out and just wait for your orders. And as soon as those orders come, you enact them, you take yourself out, and then you pop right back here and you get massaged by the chicks over there, and you get to like swim in the river of milk and honey or whatever that was. But that there was like an objective thing that they were able to tie that was so foreign to their normal. I don't know. I mean, that a lot of that seems fictionalized, but it has all of those components of trauma-based mind control, but then also this like carrot aspect, which I'm not used to in the MK Ultra papers as much. There's usually not a carrot.
You don't usually get the 70 virgins in the MK Ultra.
Right. Well, there is actually, if you look at Dr. Jose Delgado's work that did the stemaceiver with the bull, another one of his projects was called the electronic carrot that was named the pleasure carrot. That would stimulate the prostate of a bull, but it turns out it didn't have as much of an effect as the stemaceiver did.
Right. The carrot on a stick thing it's constant. I mean, that is a applicable allegory with such an overwhelming frequency. It's pretty ridiculous. You're like, in other words, like when you're looking, you're like, well, what is the carrot on the stick in this scenario? Like, I saw that happening, all through COVID stuff. There was like these different carrots on the stick. And sometimes they were really pathetic. It was literally like a donut. Like they're like literally like, just do this thing. We'll give you
poutine. Poutine fries.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know, man. Yeah.
It would have been a funnier thing if Trudeau was working with Putin, because it would have been like a poutine joke. That's true. I feel bad. We always knew that about the Canadians. They love Putin.
I do wish that I would run into someone just one time that was highly critical of Trump, but instead of talking about Russia, instead of talking about J6 or anything, they talked about Roy Cohn, because then I'd be like, thank you, let's talk about that.
That's what the movie was that you turned me on to. That's what The Apprentice was it not? I mean, that was like the main thing, was like, and then it gave meaning to the irony of it being like he had the show Apprentice, but he was the apprentice of Cohn. Wasn't that kind of the idea? Like when he
Hmm.
showed him all the tapes that he had and how this all worked, and like,
But I
Trying to
really
give
do
people what he
feel
had.
that being critical of Cohn is the same reason that the Mueller investigation was like, oh, how do we get him without shooting ourselves?
thank
There's that
you.
same thing where like, how do we criticize the Cohn connection without somehow coming out with egg on our face too?
Right. That's what it is, because it's commonplace. That's totally the point. Like, and it's. I
Roy
mean,
Cohn's underrated. What a sweet looking guy. You know what I mean? There's something about him that just he's got this. I like it. I love his energy.
He looks a
I just-
little Barney Fife, a
Yeah.
little bit.
well, he's LGB, man. He's you know,
Right, right.
I mean, that's
Liberty
where it gets all
guns.
convoluted.
Liberty guns and what was the other one?
But
Bilateral trade deals. I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that's like, but that's also super American. That's the other thing, is that we're looking at what we're defining the winning team as, and the best way to be nationalistic or proud is like more people have more opportunity. So if you're constantly, well, the other group, they're gonna like take away people's self-determination. In our group, we're going to expand self-determination. That's a way easier thing for people to be proud of, right? And so this is that I think the American dream is associated with people that want a little extra freedom. Like being LGBT makes perfect sense for a mob group, somebody who's been told he's not allowed to do the things his religion, his family's religion tell him he's not supposed to do things. He has a duty even maybe to not do those things for his people. And then America is this kind of you can do what you want dream, right? That's what they're pushing for.
well, he literally was playing chess. So like when people talk about the 4D chess or whatever, I'm like, no, for real though, because like I don't know, like me and my housemate, we had a period where we're playing a lot of chess, and I kind of was like just realizing that if you want to do well at chess, there's a few things, but one of the big things is whenever you make a move, you set it down, you set the piece down, you look at it, and you're like, if I set this piece here, is it safe? You have to look at the whole scene, and you're like, it could be as precarious, you know, as it wants to be. Like you could be like, oh man, I'm really beyond enemy lines, but if I set it here, am I good in this moment? Like, you know, like, because there's always looking at moves ahead, and if I do this, then how will they respond? But like in this move at this moment, and is there a way out? He did that all the time. Like he's like literally like, and you're like, how could you do that? How could you be over there? Like it's so precarious. But he's like, am I okay right now? Like with this move, and I'll take it from there. You know what I mean? Like that's how you play. Like you see that like with his whole career. And Trump does the same thing, where it's like he taught him that move where you're like, oh my God, but you can't do that. How can you do that? And he's like, is it okay right now? Okay. You know, it's like, okay, all right. Well, what are you gonna do? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm not blowing smoke. I'm like literally like I see the strategy, you know, and it's like it seems to be a relatively working strategy, because then it baffles people because they're like, you can't stand there. How could you stand there? When it's like, I'm standing here. What are you gonna do?
You have been standing there for a while before me. I just took their spot. Yeah. Do you guys have feelings? Do you have any feels on the Hegseth thing? You know, he like had that Signal chat group, and then some lefty media journalist was in the same room.
It's Waltz. He added him to the call. Like, I don't know why people keep even talking. Like, it's like this whole thing. It's like, dude, you're saying, okay, first of all, is it encrypted? You're like, okay, no, there's examples where they've got the CIA itself has admitted that they can get through, but this wasn't that. You're like talking about the security, but you're like, not Waltz.
Yeah, come Waltz with me.
Yeah, but no, he
Waltz
he
is such a
him
scary guy. I feel like the only reason he was like the vice president running with Kamala is so that they put him in the limelight, so we all had to like look at him a little bit more, because he's so shady, and he's like, everyone in Minnesota I've ever met hates the guy. I go to like the Minnesota State Fair, and there just be a bunch of people with hats. Like I only saw hats. There's one group that there was one booth where they had shirts that were like, I'm voting for Waltz. Nobody was there except for 3 Democrats from California and New York who were paid to be there. And then the rest of the state were wearing shirts and hats that say, I hate Waltz. You know, I don't waltz, you know, all these crazy things, like, you know, down with Waltz, like not my governor, you know, he won't be my president. Like people hate this guy. He's so hated. And, you know, and it's like, they thought maybe he just hated where he's at, because these people know him and they've seen his track record, so they know he's hateable and the bad guy. But you look at the rest of the country now, it's like he should probably be arrested, because maybe he's too old to be that valuable anymore, and this is why they put you in the president chair as you're retiring. But he was involved with like the PRC during Toad King,
Oh,
Zhang
come on,
Zemin.
Andreas. He's just a knucklehead. He's just a
Dude.
little,
Well, he was also
No.
central
That's
in
ridiculous.
George Floyd. Like I think that was the other main reason was that he fit really well into that puzzle piece right next to Kamala. That the two of them represented this. They thought it represented this like movement they were trying to harness the energy of, and it just didn't pan out for him. But I really think that without George Floyd, we wouldn't even know who Waltz's name is.
The only reason why I knew what his name was because of the snitch hotline.
And
So I was like, he was that guy. Like when it was announced with Kamala, I was like, that guy. Seriously, you're gonna
There's a weird thing about him. So like he claimed he was in China, right? Like and that he was fighting against the Chinese government. Okay, and then everyone's like, what do you mean by that? Because you weren't actually at Tiananmen Square, and during Tiananmen Square, you were supporting PRC agents, and you were dating some PRC girl who he promised to marry and then just abandoned, right? Like he did his mission. He had some like sex with some girl and destroyed her and embarrassed her in front of her family because that's not what you do in China, right? And then he just left her. So that's pretty bad and all. But what was he really doing? Because he says he was fighting against the government. Well, at the time, Toad King, right, which is the nickname for Jiang Zemin. Jiang Zemin was the wild and emotionally interesting president of China. I think more people need to know about Toad King. And he's called Toad King because, as you can tell, he looks like a toad, which is interesting to me because, the new guy, Xi Jinping, he won't let you make you can't even look at Winnie the Pooh anymore in China. It's like a band. You can't not just associate him with Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh himself has been blacklisted, right? He's canceled. But Jiang Zemin was totally cool with Toad King. Everybody loved him. And they this is a very Pepe kind of thing that in China, before it happened here, we were associating our ruler with this hypnotic toad, right? And he was in charge during the Tiananmen Square situation. And what happened with China during the 89 to 99, right? The complete corporate takeover of China, essentially, right? This new corporatist China that emerged, and his removal and replacing with Xi Jinping. All of that happened under Waltz. Waltz is really responsible. I wouldn't say he's like the most essential piece of that. I don't know if that's true, but he definitely was there and part of that operation, right?
You do realize I was talking about Mike Waltz, though, the security advisor.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were talking about Tim Waltz, Mike Waltz.
I mean, we can totally talk about Timmy.
So I thought so it wasn't Tim Waltz that was on the thing. It was Mike Waltz. Okay,
Mike Waltz.
I knew the difference. I just know more about Waltz than I do Waltz.
He added Goldberg to the call, admittedly. So when people are talking about Hegsworth, whatever, they're talking about all this stuff, and I'm just like, dude, he admitted it. It was a fumble. It was a foul. He screwed up. Like, either reprimand him or don't. Like, I don't know why they keep talking about it. Like, the last administration said the Signal was a totally fine to use encrypted app. If they got another encryption source, I don't even know why they're using one that the public uses as well. It seems like they'd have their own encrypted app that's special for them, but they said it was okay. We said that you can use this thing. Apparently the CIA has admitted that it's been acknowledged that they can get through it if they need something so it's not completely, even from us. So it can't be that safe, but you said it was okay. So the media doing this whole feigned outrage thing about it, I don't buy it, because if you want to say that you can't use Signal anymore for security, then freaking say it. Somebody needs to make a rule then. But this wasn't even that. This was just Mike Waltz adding somebody to the call, admitting it, and that's that. He screwed up. So what? Like, I'm sorry. Like, it just feels like one of these things. We're like, okay, we're going in all these directions with it. Can we just acknowledge what happened and either do something about it or don't? Like, I don't know. Sorry.
What about Kilmar? Do you guys want to talk about that guy? So, like, the Maryland man with his MS-13 tats. I mean,
I need to get caught up to speed on this.
So they said Maryland man went to Maryland to escape. He didn't ever have a visa, but that he was escaping terrorism. This is exactly what happens in Germany. In Germany, they'll have a guy who escapes, he burns his passport from Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, and then says he needs to live in protection from the Saudi Arabian government who wants him dead, right? And that way they can't send him back. In Germany, he gets stuck there. And in America, we used to be like that too. Oh, we have to protect this guy. But that way you could just be a terrorist say that you're escaping your country and then live in hiding in the United States until you blow up, a building or and run over a Christmas market in Germany, right? And this guy, he's living in America protected with government finances while he's probably working for MS-13, which is a CIA associated cartel that is no longer supported by the El Salvadorian government, right? They're completely being arrested.
People were treating it as like just Crips and Bloods crap. It's like, dude, no, this is way bigger
worship,
than anything like
they
that.
worship Saint Death, and they have weird Masonic rituals. They're straight up CIA trained, like Al Qaeda. Like it's a CIA created organization that it has weird occult fraternal practices and everything else like that. But they're saying, and I think the average American doesn't interact with drug dealers that level. They only deal with foot soldiers. I'm not sure. So they've never seen MS-13 tattoos. I'm not sure what the deal is, why Americans are so shocked by this, that there's some guy with a kid, because he has a kid. So they're like, oh, he's a father. Well, how many drug dealers, how many cartel people do you know who have families? Like all of them? That's like, they end up getting pregnant really young because they give them girlfriends really young. So they own them. They own their families. That's like, it's 101 right there.
Right.
But people keep arguing. They're like, well, this guy, he was wrongfully arrested. And he was sent to El Salvador where he's not going to get a fair trial. And so he needs to come back to the United States where we can give him a trial. And what does that even mean? Like, what? We don't have any control. He's not our citizen. He's not submissive to America. He's not obligated by American law. Not really. Like, we're obligated by our laws because we're American citizens. And it's especially, you could argue with someone who says that they're a sovereign citizen, that you're not obligated by those laws unless you accept them. And he never did, right? So here's a guy who is maybe obligated by El Salvadorian law, and we're sending him back to El Salvador where they're going to give him, the obligated constitutional court that he is owed, right? But that's bothering Americans because they know he's just going to get arrested and he's going to be put into the MS-13 gang. And Bukele came to America and talked with President Trump. If you saw Bukele talking with Trump, it was like a 90-minute Bukele Trump 90-minute conversation. And the CNN press people came out and they said, okay, like the Supreme Court ruled that you have to return him. Are you going to return him? And then they said, no, that's not what happened. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0. The opposite ruling. It was unanimous that Trump was in Trump's favor, that they don't return him, that he ought to be returned to El Salvador.
He told him he didn't even have a choice. Like that was the thing.
That's the Supreme Court's law. It's like, and so the Supreme Court's like, and so then the CNN's like, why aren't you disobeying the Supreme Court, forcing this other president to give you back his own citizen so that America can deal with something that has nothing to do with them? And Bukele said to this, like, are you going to return him to America? And then because are you listening to this at all? I hope you're not suggesting that I kidnap an American, kidnap a terrorist and then smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right? He's not welcome there. He's not supposed to be there, and he's a terrorist. So it's this whole thing about like, what is a terrorist and what is a cartel? And, why are we pretending this guy is somehow innocent? It kind of blows my mind. I don't know.
Yeah. I asked Grok about this, about tattoos for MS-13, and it does give that description of that in that order for the like it's there. And not that Grok's the ultimate authority, as I was pointing out earlier. But did you guys see the photos from his wife where she put the hearts, like she like with the app, like put the hearts over his hand in every photo? So like she's like they're hiding his tattoos, and this is from before everything went down. So it's like when she shared those online, apparently she didn't want those tattoos visible. So apparently it's not all nothing or whatever. I don't, but yeah, no, it's rough. But I'm waiting for people on the left in solidarity to start getting the MS-13 tattoos, like to stand firm with them. It's just like all these self-owns.
Yeah,
all over the
you said tattoos for MS-13. For some reason, my heart went for a perfect mashup of Flowers for Algernon, but it's tattoos for MS-13.
Yeah. Or they start adding, they take the LGBTQ whatever and they just add in MS-13 and maybe Hamas as well while they're at it.
LGBTQ MS-13. That's pretty good. That's what we do. We add it to the flag and it'll be okay.
We need some colors to represent MS-13 because they need to be protected as well. So it's just, it sucks, man. It's like, and also the thing with they're going there on taxpayer money. We got government officials like going to El Salvador for this guy, like using taxpayer funds. Like I'm like, well, where's that doesn't seem that efficient. I don't know what's happening, but yeah. Did you really need to go there? And what are you gonna take about? Like, what are they? It just feels like Panderverse City, man. I don't know. It's crazy.
I don't know. It's just like the people that the Democrats are picking to make their points with are pretty interesting choices.
No, it's like Bullworth when he was talking about OJ, when he's like, you got to get behind somebody other than a running back who stabs his wife. You know, like this is
seriously. You got Kilmar, you got Luigi Manchione. I'm trying to think of the other examples, but it's like they're all the worst possible person to be your defense. I don't know. It's weird.
Oh yeah, the Luigi thing. It's amazing, dude. I'm like literally like the calls for violence all over the place, and I'm like, dude, this is not something happened to the left I used to know. There's like that song, somebody I used to know, like, and they did like you're not the Star Wars I used to know, which is really good, by the way, and I recommend doing a YouTube search for the Star Wars I used to know. But it feels like it's like the left I used to know. It's like, what happened to you, man? You're like Star Wars. I can't even see any remnant.
Did we mention already how this Luigi's Mansion guy was on the team? Was it for Civilization 6, the video game, and has been credited with the most amount of UI fixes? Like the people that are hardcore into Civ 6, he made so many quality of life improvements to the overall UI that he's almost seen as like this unsung hero of the Civilization series, which is what if you just take a step back and listen to that statement that Luigi's Mansion has been credited with improving Civilization.
There's a lot of levels here, man. There's
a lot of levels, right? Yeah, totally. And I'm like, you know what? I said something. I made some statement on Twitter about the tolerant left, and people are like, they'll say one of two things. They'll either say we were never tolerant. I don't know who told you that, or this is what you get. We've had enough. So it's like one way or the other. It's like justifying violence in different ways. And like I'm just like I'm not used to that. I'm used to the it's still in me, like the anti-war position, like that's what we were like during the Bush era, going back to Vietnam. Wasn't that supposed to be the thing?
You gotta flex a little harder. I know you're old enough to also remember the Clinton administration too. And what was the Clinton administration like? We fake a school shooting so we can bomb Bosnia, right? Like that. I mean, right? Like the day.
Wasn't that like the only thing that happened during Bill Clinton's presidency, though? That was like, and it was like a huge deal.
Clinton's presidency was a lot more like Obama, where Obama said we're ending the war in Iraq and we're beginning the overseas contingency operations, right? So we had the fall of the Soviet Union happened under George Bush, right? George Herbert Walker Bush, CIA, and then President of the United States. And then it transfers over to Clinton, and Clinton runs a corporate administrative government, right? Because it's the end of states and the beginning of international globalist corporations running everything. You can see it from the picture of the Oval Office meeting room. They're all suits.
With Bosnia, that was like one incident. It's like that was
not
like
one incident though. We also did El Salvador,
but the only thing that was highlighted. Like I'm just remembering from the time there was nothing that was highlighted in the
white people were racist. White people were super racist. So it's like you could bomb and you could train Nicaraguans to kill 10,000 people in a single night with you could do all of this stuff in Africa. God, what was going on in China and Asia, particularly outside of PRC? I mean, all of these little secret wars, the 90s were the time of secret little wars.
Right. Yeah. I didn't fight a secret war in Nicaragua, so you could go around bad mouthing Lady Liberty. That was the
100%. Yeah. But then under because of the reason why Bosnia was so important was because Yugoslavia was torn between the Serbs and the Croatians for control by the United States trying to influence Croatia, because Britain and the United States used Croatia during Yugoslavia. That's where James Bond would meet. It was interzone, right? It was William Burroughs interzone, and you could meet at the Casino Royale in Zagreb. There'd be like a casino for people, or in Split, that they would do, and then they would do their interactions with. So the West always had influence, and they used Roman font or writing. Even like if you go to the Croatian part, they're writing in Western letters. But in Serbia and in Bosnia, from the Serbian influence, they were more Cyrillic, more Russian. and the Serbians were dealing with Russia. So it was a bigger issue that and it still is, that the Russian mob is in Bosnia, is in former Yugoslavia, and they're building up. So Russia offered Serbia that they would let them take over the government of Yugoslavia. They would like say, hey, if you can contain the rest of the Yugoslavia, we'll put you in charge of it. Once you become a Soviet state, you'll be the only ones making a vote for the Soviet Union. And so that started a really important war, the way it always does, like Vietnam, where the United States is like, well, we have to go in there and we have to get American people interested in this.
That was a proxy war with Russia for sure, just oversimplifing it. But
which one are you talking about, Vietnam or
Vietnam?
Bosnia too, because Bosnia too. Sure. Bosnia was a proxy war with Russia. It said it 100%.
Isn't it almost always?
Which is weird, right? Yeah, that's why I think also what's interesting about this, like it could be that we're leading towards I mean, if America keeps working against NAFTA and starts making deals with BRICS, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be the opposite.
Right. Well, what's happening right now is it looks like everything's been like, for the most part, as a general statement, it's like that was the thing with the tariffs. Everybody came to the table. China doubled down another direction. So we saw it really was revealing of like, oh, so what is our relationship to China really? And it was like, it seems like this big test that was more than a test, because it's like really like now the trade war is now we've directed it. We've like, there was a general like, to everybody, we're going, we're taking this big dramatic position with all these different countries all at the same time. And then everybody comes to the table for the most part, generally, except for China. So it's like, and now it's all like, seems like it's all directed there. And so things are coming to a head with us in China, are they not? Like, but the thing is like, I would like to do this, just speaking.
Well, the Jesuits are trying to take over China, by the way.
Interesting. So which is interesting too, with 88-year-old Pope just dying on Easter Monday. But the first Jesuit Pope.
This, right? 1933, there was, what was it, 4 million Chinese people were Catholic or were Christian, but a lot. And this is also you could connect. You know who else is into this? Is the oh my God, what's the name of the group? The like super conservative conspiracy group from the 80s. Oh my God, what they called? The Warren Birch, is that right?
Right.
Yeah, the 1980s, though, right? John Birch, by the way.
John Birch. Sorry, my bad. I apologize. So John Birch, very important guy. The John Birch Society is not made by John Birch. It's named after John Birch. John Birch was born in China, I think, American missionary, a Christian missionary. Right. And so we betrayed them near the end of the war and allowed for a lot of Christians to die and a lot of Westerners to die so that communist China could thrive. And so this is something that's been going on. They said, hey, there's a conspiracy to replace Taiwan with this communist government in China going back to the 50s and 60s. And everyone was like, no way. And then the Republicans under Kissinger do it. They straight up not only make PRC the official government of China, but they disacknowledge Taiwan. And Taiwan to this day is not a country. It's a trading partner. Right. This is
in the Talking Heads movie, right? The real stories or whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm a dancing bear.
There's the segment of that deals with the Birch Society where they're in the church and they're doing the whole.
That's right.
The Birch Society is so crazy too, because
they asked me to be a part of them.
There's some crossover there with Lyndon LaRouche that ends up kind of like propagating a lot of this John Birch Society rhetoric, and he's got, I think, is it called Executive Review? It was like a magazine that would claim to have exposed all these CIA and Jesuit ties and all this. Mm-hmm. But if you look into Lyndon LaRouche himself, this always blew my mind, is that he started as a staunch communist, like a flat-out anti-capitalist communist. Yeah. And there was like a Southern switch within the brain of Lyndon LaRouche where he comes back to the table almost overnight. And he's like, oh, and by the way, I'm no longer communist. Now I'm a John Birch capitalist patriot.
That's the same thing. That's what blows my mind. Like this idea that communism is a form of managerial theory for capitalists. It's a sustainable form of capitalism where you feed all of your horses out of the same trough because it's more efficient. And you make sure that you give them all medicine so that your horses can keep racing, right? Communism comes from Owenism, right? And Robert Owen, he was a corporatist and a businessman from England, but he came to America to do a joint session in front of Congress in the late 19th century to explain how it benefited corporations to have corporate social responsibility. Like, if all of your workers are getting drunk every night and showing up late, what do? If they're living in a place where they're getting sick all the time and they're not showing up to work, what do? If their kids aren't going to school and learning how to be your workers in the future, what do? Well, you build housing, you force a what's it called, curfew, where they go to sleep at night. You take their kids from them and make them go to school in the day, and you choose what they're allowed to eat, and you ban what they're not, like liquor, what they're not allowed to drink. And eventually what you do is you have a perfect Zionist state, right? And that was the thing, it was Zion. They were trying to create a communist utopian republic, Zion. And how could you measure that? Well, freedom of agency wasn't the most important thing, but they could see from the Dutch grocer mercantilism that more mobility and more agency would happen with more capital.
Dude, yeah. Jello Biafra has a song called Every Home a Prison that he released like later, not Dead Kennedys, but like later on, like they remixed it and did all kinds of things with it. But it's like, it lays it all out, like this view of the future that's totally plausible and kind of happened, or at least started to happen in 2020. You know, it's like the lockdown future. It's also what Bill Hicks talked about, where they'd like, just pizza delivery trucks everywhere and just like, don't leave your houses. Like, it's just existing in like a perpetual curfew or whatever. But then Jello Biafra, like in 2020, was just like super like into the whole that, like he was just like all about it. Like there was no, like, it was like, dude, you made a song about this thing and now it's actually like happening on some level and you're just like in complete denial about it. It was so weird.
What did you do?
Yeah, I want to speak.
World Trade Center is Wu-Tang Clan. I never noticed that, but it does make
weird.
sense.
Thank you. Yeah, because the Wisco Tango, Charlie. No, there's like these two books, like, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, right? Super applicable to some of what we're talking about in terms of the coups and the various things. Like, that's a legit book. Everyone should look at it. But also there's the Not So Secret History of the Drug War by Charles Shaw. And like, I've wanted to, like, it would be a project, but like those books are dealing with like the same era and areas of the world, except the Not So Secret History of the Drug War is like this is all like disclosed. So he's not even like, this isn't like conspiracy theory necessarily. It's just like what we know about the fake drug war stuff and who profited and relating to the CIA and all this stuff. But I would love to just like, I'm just saying, like, if I had the time to just do something like that, I'd love to take those two books, Confessions of an Economic Hitman and the Not So Secret History of the Drug War, and just like see how they meet.
Let me quickly, just so we get through that part, I just want to show, because it's interesting to me. And remember, China's population has dropped a lot. Let's also remember that right now people are saying that the Chinese population is not 1 billion anymore, that it might be like 500 million or even less than that, and all of them are not having kids. So in the next 20 years it's going to half again. And so there might be even now less than the amount of people in the United States that there are in China.
Wait, there's something weird about that though, because so China in the last like 15-20 years or something, it used to be that the vast majority of China not that long ago was countryside. Now it's so industrialized and there's so much new cities in China over the last like 15-20 years or whatever, to the point that I had somebody tell me something who had visited China regularly for years, told me his conception of China, and I've been repeating it and basically being wrong because I thought that this was just like things have changed. So like I'd be tell you, oh, the vast majority of China's countryside, and people come out from the country and they're farmers, and this used to be true. I mean, I'm sure it's true on some level, but not like it was, where they'd go
in the 60s.
They're essentially they were living in what are like closets basically, and they're like it's like the equivalent of a tiger cage, and the way that they're working them and stuff, they were ending up deformed. I'm sure it still goes on, but not in the same. It's not what it used to be, because they used to do this like, they're like, if I put in my time, I make this money, I come back to my farm, and then I'll be better off. And then they were like deformed basically, like they couldn't continue to do the task. So there's these massive protests that were happening in China. I was told this by somebody who witnessed directly. So he used to just go to the cities, and then when he visit, he would start going more to the country because he speaks Chinese. So he'd like go and like talk to people in the country and get this other idea around what's going on. It's like, it's mostly countryside, I should explore that. But then he was like telling me, he's like, you had these massive protests and they would get no attention from their media. So they certainly, like, we would never hear about them because they don't even hear about them in China unless if you're there at that spot where they're coming together to try and do this. I was like, protests in China? How often do you hear about protests in China? At this point, I don't even know if there are like that.
There
like
are,
I don't.
they're not. So there's a lot less people in the countryside. There are people that they specifically force to go to the countryside now that run a lot of these farms. There are still groups of Chinese that live in the countryside, but it's a lot less. Those are probably at this point being kept in the countryside on purpose because they realize that once you go to the city, you stop breeding. Most of these guys don't meet girls. They can't afford to meet girls. And so there's less kids. So what they're trying to do is like, all right, if you have a kid, send your kid to the cities, but have more kids. They got rid of the one-child policy under Toad King Zemin, right? So China's been trying to figure that out for ages. The problem is they built hundreds of cities. Everyone wants to live in a city this generation, and Bailan, right? Bailan is this idea that let it rot, lie down, and sleep. So many Chinese are kids. You know, they're not breeding, and they're not going to have more kids, and they're about to hit 40. That whole generation. So there's less kids the next generation. So it's halving and halving and halving. And it might have gone from 1 billion to 500 million. Like India is still a pretty large population.
Sure.
But like China is dropping. And pretty soon China will not, 20 years ago, China had more women in the Chinese army than there were people in the United States. Right.
So how is it that China can be so much more, such bigger cities dramatically? Like China's huge for it to get to that point in relatively recent years.
You don't really need
and
that
yet
many
for there
people.
to be less people. Okay.
You don't need that many people to run a city.
Okay.
So once you get the stuff established, then essentially you have a city that runs, and there's like a lot more room in those cities. There's plenty of empty buildings, and there's huge. A lot of Chinese were investing in ghost cities. They're like, okay, well, buy real estate, buy land, buy property, and then that'll be your retirement.
So
that's all
that's
gone.
what's happening in places like London. I know they got these buildings. They didn't even they found it out because of the electricity, because there's like no electricity bills. Like people weren't. They're like, these massive buildings, but they're investments. A lot of it a lot from China
and
like
Russia.
Chinese investors and Russia and you name it, Saudi Arabia, who knows? But like they're sitting there, and at some point they're going to be like open for business. And what's going to happen to the housing market for London for all the people who don't have those? But like, it's going to be crazy. Like that is happening already, and it's going to continue to happen. And like, if you're, I don't know, man. It's
the Catholic thing I think is interesting, just because you look at it, it's like, okay, so in 1933 there were 4.1 million Chinese Christians, right? Which is a lot. That's actually, because China wasn't that big in 1933, and by 1960 they had gone through the Cultural Revolution, killed a lot of people, and they had halved it. Only about less than 2 million Christians were left in China by 1960. So we think of China from the 1960s because that's what a lot of the boomers grew up around, which were very atheist and I would almost say ignorant to Christianity, because it was something erased. The way they burned and destroyed violins, they burned and destroyed Bibles, so no one had any context for Christianity. Then by the 1980s, well, because of Kissinger and the Republican corporatist lobby, this went from this 10 million. It's a 538.9% increase in Christians by 1980. That's unheard of. It's crazy to imagine that 10 million new Christians were formed. But then again, it makes sense when you realize how fast China's population was growing in the 80s. And then it got up to 32, almost 33 million in 1990, right? 33 million Christians in a country that had 1 billion, though. And then by half of almost 50 million people were Christians in the year 2000. Again, negligible number compared to 1 billion, but not compared to, like, if this was the American population, this would be a huge percentage of the American population, right? And it's going up even further. I think we're something like 100 million, say 2025, 64 million Christians right now. And again, the population of China might be more like 300 to 400 million people. So this is interesting to me to see how quickly China could become a Jesuit state again. And remember, China was a Jesuit state originally. That's where Tartaria in the West, why we know the word Tartary, because that's how the Jesuits referred to China at the time. If all the old 13th century books, they're saying, oh, well, Chitao is Tartary, and Ian Fleming's brother's going to Tartary and is studying Tartary. So this is the rebuilding of the Jesuit Tartary in a lot of ways. And you can see that coming because China's collapsing. And there are actually tons of Black people from Africa being brought into China right now because they're not working, they're not producing, they're not doing any of the things that they used to do 10 years ago. So who knows what China's going to be like, but it's not going to be anything like what it was in our lifetime. It's going to become a completely different country. because at the time it was an ethno-state, and it probably won't remain an ethno-state. And it wasn't an ethno-state in the 1930s. Like 100 years ago, China had 50, 60, 70 more kinds of ethnicities and more languages than it does now. I mean, it's crazy to even think about it. Even in our lifetime, Tibet was such a contentious issue. But Tibet today is very much controlled by China, and its culture has become Chinese. And then they've ethnically cleansed in a lot of ways Tibet. So we don't even know, but it's like we're erasing what used to be there so they can put something else there.
It's funny the way that the focus will happen when it comes to like ethno-state stuff. Like the way we'll treat it with one people, like, oh well, that's China. That's just, but then
it helps. It helps. I think that's why they did that, because if you were like, well, China is actually like hundreds and like 500 different ethnic groups with 500 different languages, that was way more complicated. And that's the way it was described centuries ago. And today it's one ethno-state, the Han Chinese, and they speak like, we don't even think about Cantonese anymore, right? It's like they speak their administrative language of Mandarin. I mean, but look what happens to ethno-states. Look at what happened to Sparta. Look what's happened to Japan. Something happens. Look, without the mixing in the melting pot, it galvanizes as it refines. It gets smaller.
Was Atlantis an ethno-state?
Oh God! In the Disney movie, it was
not according to Donovan. Donovan's description of Atlantis, I don't think it's regarded as such, but maybe
in the Disney movie, they're all like blonde Aryan Jews, right? Because Leonard Nimoy is in charge, and it's like they all have this like white hair,
Right. That's true. I don't know if Disney's the authority on it, but I don't think Donovan is either. It's just
you don't think Disney's the authority on Atlantis?
No.
Isn't it Plato?
Disney has the Yellow Submarine. They probably
I saw that from Manly P. Hall, but I've never actually read Plato's thing except for excerpts from it from Manly P. Hall. So have you?
Plato wrote about it, and then apparently Francis Bacon, and then Manly Palmer Hall wrote about Francis
but that was
Bacon getting it from Plato.
Utopia, right? That was
Plato talked about Herodotus, and Herodotus as well talked about a country that was highly advanced and was able to realize all their dreams. So very similar to what we're told the singularity will become. So a lot of people associate it with the singularity. This becomes much more important in the 19th century. But by the 16th century, you've got Sir Francis Bacon on his deathbed. Actually, when he dies, he's smuggled out in his herbology book, a little book about New Atlantis. And New Atlantis is based on that Rosicrucian idea that we'll rebuild Atlantis with all of our goals in America, very secrets of Nim kind of thing. And the Rosicrucians were going to turn America into, a utopian paradise with free speech and everything like that. But for Bacon, it was that the Bible had washed up on shore, a King James Bible washed up on shore in this island of Atlantis, and then they learned how to read it, started speaking that language, and became Christians the same way that movie Galaxy Quest, where the aliens find Star Trek reruns and they become
right. But that's
this is perfect.
Star Trek episode itself that was America, where their religion is of the American religion, and then William Shatner has to break it down for them that they don't understand it, and he's like, that all men are created equal. He has to tell the thing, you don't get it.
That's the thing, is that these Christians from England who come to New Atlantis realize that they're not nearly as Christian as the New Atlanteans. These New Atlanteans picked up the book and actually followed it and lived by it, which is something that we couldn't do as Europeans, because Europeans came from a convoluted pagan background, they thought. So there's nothing, it's interesting how they're saying Christianity doesn't really work in Europe. Rosicrucianism and this freedom of religion, it's not possible here really until we destroy this. So we have to go to New Atlantis where we can start over, and then we can actually live that way. Then we can re-imprint that on Europe, which is exactly what happens in the 19th and 20th century, right? This idea of building, even to the point of what the German government refers to themselves as, the Christian Democratic Party. That's what Merkel's party. Does anyone think of Angela Merkel as Christian? I don't know, but she apparently does. That's crazy in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
the same way Joe Biden's Catholic.
Right. Joe Biden's Catholic. And Pelosi can't hate somebody because she's Catholic. It's not possible. It's not even possible. She has no hate in her heart because of her Catholicism.
That's more of the reptilian.
She has no heart.
Yeah. No, she's I can't love either. There's just,
there's no feeling there. Yeah.
There's no feeling there. Yeah. So Ziggurat says in the comments that Donovan is still making music, and he's right. He before David Lynch passed, he did a project with Donovan. And I think maybe even more than one. I'm not sure, but it's pretty cool. There's like a video that's like a David Lynch video that's Donovan's relatively new music. It's pretty crazy, but yeah. I met a guy when I worked at the record store who was telling me that like he was in the 60s, he was at a Donovan concert, and Donovan was like in the crowd, like there's other people playing first, right? So it's like he was supposed to go on, but he was like next to this guy. So like he was like looking over, and Donovan was standing there with sleeves that like went to the ground. So he was just like had these giant sleeves and his weird outfit or whatever. And he's like kept on looking over at him like it's freaking Donovan. He's just like here, like he came to see Donovan. And then eventually they like made an announcement when it was time for Donovan to go on. They're like, Donovan won't be able to play tonight. He's not really feeling up to it. And he said like everybody around him like went and looked at him, and he just put his arms up like, I don't know. It's like had these draping sleeves just like going down, like, I don't know. And like, yeah, anyway, whatever.
Oh my God.
You know who else is, I think I saw this correctly. Tiny Tim is still making music too.
No, he's still alive. Tiny Tim. I thought he was so sensitive. I didn't think he'd last that long. No offense to Tiny Tim. He just seemed like really like a.
He looks like a guy who could make it into his 90s. Are you kidding me? He's got that
really,
sort of like, that weak but sustainable kind of vibe, you know?
Oh my God! I guess he really did tiptoe through the tulips. Like
maybe I lied. It says he died in '96, but I swear.
Oh, how dare you!
A new song that came out in like the last month or so that was featuring.
Like they uncovered an old song from Tiny Tim, or they remixed Tiny Tim, or something. I don't know. Maybe there's a rapper called Tiny Tim now. You might want to look into that.
Before we clone dire wolves, we should clone Tiny Tim.
I concur. Yes, sir.
Or just like genetically modify normal people to get Tiny Tims, I guess, which is closer to where we're at. What about the anti-Christian bias task force?
I don't know enough about it. I saw the blurb. What do you got?
We talked about like anti-Semitism is illegal in America. It's always kind of been, but now they're going to push for anti-Semitic defamation league, which will arrest you for. I mean, isn't that hate crimes? It just feels very leftist. It's very like what we grew up with already that we were fighting against was like hate crimes, you know.
This ends up having a backdoor effect of creating more anti-Semitism. That's
this is going to be against Christianity. Exactly.
This one's dangerous not because of the anti-Semitism, but like the one that this is very problematic to even wonder this. But and I'm sure there's like a stand-up routine someone's already done. But the whole like questioning the Holocaust thing, right? The person that's like, what if it was 5,999,999
arrested in Germany instantly.
And at what point is there like a certain exact number that once you go under it, it's like, hey guy, like hands behind your back, or or if you say, what if it was 6,000,001, like one of those kind of things, because that gets grouped under the exact same thing as denial, and then denial gets grouped under anti-Semitism, right?
ADL and APAC aren't helping. Like it's always the problem with the allies, man. They're just not helping.
I see this changing though, like the wiki article, check it from 10 years ago versus now, on Holocaust denial. So now it explains it better. It's like in the denial of Holocaust anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, that's still very classic, that asserts that the genocide of the Jews by the Nazis is a fabrication or exaggeration. It includes making one or more of the following false claims. False claim 1, the Nazi Germany's final solution was aimed at only deporting Jews from the territory of the Third Reich. It did not include their extermination. False claim 2, Nazi authorities did not use extermination camps and gas chambers for the mass murder of Jews. False claim 3, the actual number of Jews murdered is significantly lower than that accepted figure of approximately 6 million. Approximately. False claim was 4 or 5 now. The Holocaust is a hoax perpetrated by the Allies, the Jews, or the Soviet Union. Okay, so these at least are explaining what the potential debunking or criticisms, the nuances to the Holocaust are. And it is different than what the law is in some countries. Like, if you go to Germany and you were to say that the Holocaust was less than 6 million people, then they're going to arrest you. It's illegal to even say that, right? So it is even just one person less. That is illegal to say that, which is crazy to think about because it could be one person more, it could be one person less. It's like,
it could be one person more. Yeah. Because the 6 million becomes symbolic. So you're like, what if it was 6.5 million? But they don't want to say that because 6 million is where it's at. Yeah.
Not 4-minute abs.
Yeah. No. 7 little chipmunks sitting on a branch eating lots of sunflowers on my uncle's ranch. You know that old children's tale from the sea? Come on. Yeah, sorry.
But I think it's concerning because it's going to lead to a point pretty soon where no one can. I mean, we've already gotten to the point where no one believes anything, and people think that all of history is a lie, Tartaria is real, and that the moon landing was fake. So it's not hard to imagine very soon that that the 20th century becomes this abstract, right? That it's
Right. Well, it becomes more tantalizing when you say that this is off limits to think this or say this, and so that's what it ends up having the opposite effect. And I don't know if anybody informed the ADL of that, or if that's the function of the ADL.
I think it's the function, right? The psychological,
So yeah,
it's like Bernays, right?
Right. So right now, you look at like Trump's position on all of this, and you look at how unified MAGA has been, and so like there's powers to be for sure that are totally like, well, what a perfect wedge like to create, to just be like, if you want to break apart a movement, if you're like, well, this is the leader's position, and you're like, well, if we can divide everyone on an issue, not that they wouldn't be already, but I mean, it feels like there's very, very divisive things taking place with that, like where,
I feel the pendulum swinging one way and another. So we went to, it's like, it's okay to be gay. It's good to be gay. You need to let your kid be like with a transgender book librarian, like reading to them, have gay, like transgender people in your classroom with your kids.
Right.
And then like, you should raise your kid as a cat. And like, it just started, once it got there, it swings back. And so it swings back. And the first thing it does is it goes like, it's okay to be a nationalist, but then it's moving fast. So it's like, it swings back. It's okay. It's good to be a nationalist. And that's like, you must be a nationalist or die. We're almost
right. Exactly. So that's my beef, is that it seems like on both sides that it's like, it's not okay to have a nuanced perspective or to even acknowledge two sides of an equation. Like it's this or that. And there is no other. And so there's the othering of the otherable. And it happens so easily. And it's one of my big criticisms of the left, but it's also a criticism I have of the right when it comes to the extremes. Like, I want to be able to acknowledge both sides of an issue. Am I not allowed to do that? If I don't meet every checkbox of a group, it's why I can't never call myself a leftist, because I'm not going to meet their checkboxes and they're going to kick me out. And it's just what happens. I'm not allowed in the club. Like, even if I wanted to be in the club, they'd be like, you're unacceptable. So how are you supposed to keep your club together? How do you expect to even have a party continue into the future if you become more and more exclusive? Like, you can't have this exclusive club and like think you're going to win elections with that.
It seems like it's like a new version, or maybe even an inversion of the Wheel of Fortune, right? Where you want to be at the actual axis to avoid all of the ups and downs of this Wheel of Fortune. But in this scenario, I wonder if it's more like you're in the Fabian Society or the Frankfurt School or whoever. Like, let's say you're at this Fabian Society, and instead of being at the axis of Wheel of Fortune, you want to be on the outskirts of where the pendulum's swinging. So like, you can hold it and swing it to your buddy on the other side. And like, I represent socialism and you represent your kid as a cat. Right. And as long as we're the ones that are swinging the pendulum back and forth to each other, like, we're part of the crew that gets unaffected because we are in control of the Hegelian dialectic in that case.
I was about to say Scottish Rite over here with a head for both wings. You gotta just a little there, a little there. Yeah, just know who you're talking to, which time you're talking. Just split your personality. I don't know. The Christian right thing is interesting because it's like Christian right is Zionism. So obviously it's the next step is Christian right. And Christians have this sort of Noahide where they have to follow the 7 of the 10 commandments. And the other thing, I mean, I was reading, because we were doing the Ike thing, I wanted to read his new book. And his new book, he's talking about the left and the right brain, and how, one focuses on symbols and the other focuses on connections, right? And so one will try to, like, the right brain will try to make a bigger pattern out of things, even though it doesn't know what those little pieces are. And then the left brain will try to figure out what the little pieces are, but can't see the bigger pattern. And you have people that have religions based on both. Particularly the faith thing is this, like, everything is connected, have faith that it all will come together. And that can be useful because you need to have these connections between the left and the right brain. But people will often end up with a religion that says, don't doubt the connection. You have to fall in line to that connection. And Christianity is like that. It's really strange because even if you have the history, and I love Mormonism and Christianity and talking about all these things, but this idea that Jesus is blood sacrifice for your immortality and that all things are forgivable, that means that Klaus Schwab is forgivable, right? That means that any of the Illuminati, Pizzagate people are forgivable according to that rule. And so are you a bad Christian if you don't think that some things have consequences, that karma, exists, that people that if you break a cup, it's shattered forever? Is it really, why is it that we're pushing? I mean, what's the future of pushing a religion, an ideology that all things are forgivable, right?
Right. There's also the idea that things are their own effect, and it's hard to explain that kind of, but like that your punishment for whatever it is that you're doing is inherent in everything that's implicit in you relating to yourself, that this is all you are. Like, it's like if you do an action that's selfish, that selfish action is implicit in that action is the assumption that you are this particular limited thing and that that's all you are. So if you exist in that paradigm, it's its own kind of hell. I think it's kind of what Jacob's Ladder was kind of pointing at, is that you're making a hell for yourself by all your implicit assumptions about yourself. Like, you're forming that reality. So it's not really about the action as much as what's implied about yourself that this action stems from. Does that make sense?
There's another tie in here too. I don't know how tangential this is, but the bicameral mind theory from like the 70s or something, right? And this is Julian Jaynes. And one of those explanations, if you were to put in the context of like Christianity, is that Old Testament was the side of your brain that was only able to hear hallucinations or voices from God or these like external.
If you were to have a bicameral synapse connection and it was rare at the time, then you would think, wow, this is so, I understand more than I should know. This must be God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one side of the brain hears the commands, and then the other side of the brain, I believe, would take instruction, be able to derive instruction from those voices, and that the two being paired is a recent phenomenon that only after the New Testament represented like the someone
the commonality
being able
of being a
to control
prophet.
both sides. And one of those weird examples, and I never found any of these links in the MK Ultra. I'm sure there's some weird sub projects that actually did
look
get
into
burned.
look into dolphins.
Well, the dolphins, and also some of the original research on feral children would utilize some of these theories put forth by the bicameral mind theory, and they kind of stated that after a certain age, and I believe this has been somewhat proven, that after a certain age, if you are a feral child, like literally being raised by wild animals, that there's a certain, I think it's like between the age of 4 and 7, that if you don't start socializing, like you are permanently an animal at some point. Like you will never become a full human because you've crossed some threshold. And part of the bicameral mind theory, I guess, tried to explain a portion of that.
See, that's interesting, obviously, because this idea that humans were like animals, and that if we were to lose this spiritual, metaphysical, supernatural
or if you
quality,
if you just miss the bus for the first 7 years,
but
you can't catch up to it.
So imagine though that you kill everyone's parents, and then all that's left are babies in a hospital. Most of them will die without touch. Some of them might be raised by wolves, and they'll never become humans. Not the way we think of as humans, which are something above and different and separate from the animal kingdom, right? This is an alien quality to humanity that we have, and it's not explainable exactly by genetics or by nature. It's explained by this nurturing process, which is a wet wire brain development that happens, that's trained. So we take the brain and it's trained a certain way, and that zeitgeist keeps us in this super animalistic, this human quality. But that could go away. We could literally, if everyone who had that was gone, the next generation couldn't get it back, unless we got it from something else, from demons, angels, AI, something that could train us to have that, right?
Which and what you're leading to here too is the reason why I kind of think that 100 monkey theory is kind of BS. Yeah. Because of how fragile just what we're talking about is, like civilization, humanity, language, bicameral minds, that if you were to get rid of everyone to teach that next generation, I don't think that there's 100. Is that what it's called? 100 monkey theory?
I wouldn't say that's the same theory. So the 100th monkey theory is that while these things are happening in the zeitgeist, that people pick up on it. And I think that is true. If there's enough, if there are enough people that are thinking away and having ideas, then somewhere disconnected from that, someone might still have that idea, because these are ideas happening, right? It's not that it's your idea. These are transient or
one larger movement. And there's
biofield.
The biofield. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
But I think that it's the opposite. What we're saying is if all of that goes away, then the 100th monkey, it's almost similar. The biofield's gone, so the 100th monkey can't pick up on that biofield.
I hate to say this, guys, but I actually do have to split soon. So
Yeah, we're at the 2. Wow, we're late in this. Okay, let me just really quickly go to David's page. David, check out MK Ultra. Here's all the music. Here's all the movies. Here's all the autism reports. You're gonna love David's page. He loves X-Men as much as the next guy. Anything you wanted me to point out from your highlights reel this week?
Not necessarily my highlights, my sync films. Yeah, no, just scroll through my sync films. If something jumps out at you, check it out. Look at my website. I got over 200 for free streaming and download. It's my passion. So yeah, I got all kinds of stuff.
I highly recommend watching his sync films on a projector because that's
Totally.
where it's most fun. It's nice to get with your friend. Get your friends together and watch a sync film from David Plate on MK Ultrasound 723. Also, Paranoid American still has some sticker books. There's like 3 left or something, right? So.
Yeah, there's less than 10 left. They're almost all completely gone. I should have ordered more, but
Dude, there's some good looking stickers. I saw some tweets with some like
They're
zoomed
not-
in on some of them. The Mason Hall one with the 2 pillars and the check, like, ooh, very nice.
I'll send you you guys a whole bunch of them too. I got some Synctank
God bless you,
cards
Governor.
that came in today. Also, this is pretty big news. The artist has officially started. He's been paid.
Are you talking about Hitler? What do you mean the artist? What are you saying? You mean for your
for the comic that David and I have been working on for the last year, 2 years. It is officially in production. I don't know if the redirect is working yet, but if you go to kubrickcomic.com, I can't believe that existed, but now I own it.
Wow.
It'll just bring you to where you can sign up for the newsletter, and then as soon as we actually launch it, I'm hoping that that's just what our go-to plug will be until we release that thing.
Can I have a credit? Can I be like a consultant?
Oh, dude, a million percent, you're in it. Of course,
consultant, but consultant.
This is I think this is the first official Synctank comic, so we're all in it for sure.
God bless you. That sounds awesome.
Totally.
Everyone, make sure you're buying the Paranoid American comic books that make us all happy. And dude, $5 gets you a trading pack card. If you have to be crazy not to get this. You'd be a bad your parents and your kids would look at you differently if you didn't get this. You know what I mean? Like you got $5. It's really not that big of a deal.
There are so many more cards. Like literally today, right before I started recording, I got the last shipment in. So now there's close to, I think, 80 different card designs. We got
you guys
Wilhelm
don't understand
Reich
how important this is.
Epstein and Diddy and LaVaylor Swift. We got them all now.
Oh
These are super high quality. This is no joke. These are legit trading cards. This is a collectible set. You're gonna invest in your future by getting the MK Ultra Paranoid American trading card deck. I mean,
and you can just go to conspiracycards.com and it'll bring you right there.
You're a fool not to. You're a fool not to. You're a wise man or woman or anything in between if you buy a $5 pack. It's so easy to do. I want everyone to have this trading card deck. So please, everyone, Conspiracy Trading Cards, check them out. Order like a dozen of these and give them to everyone you know. Are you kidding me? Like everyone needs to have these cards. That's the only thing I'm asking of you. I'm not asking much. All right. So order those. And then you got to check out the satanicpanicgame.com. This is not quite launched, but it's coming soon. He's working on it. It's going to be cool for people that like sexualized conspiracy novels and comics, but also he's working on a version so that if you're Mormon, you can read it too. And that's great because this can be seductive and it could be.
It's going to be Mormon first. It'll be Mormon
first,
first, and then you'll get the mod to make it unmormon.
Right. So that's going to be awesome. So like literally you can play this with your kids. I know that sounds crazy, but you would be able to. And then pretty soon there's going to be a version with boobs for dad. And that's God bless America. You know, we're all about freedom here. I think freedom is important. I think boob should be free. Free the boob.
Hey, Stefan in the comments was asking holographic Baphomet. Actually, yes, that's already been out for the last 6 months or so. There's already a holographic Baphomet card.
The Baphomet foil card is important. Some of these cards are foil. Some of these cards are not foil. You get this foil one, you're definitely going to put it behind glass. You know what? I want to see the future. The future's people that are like, you're going to go into a comic book store. You're going to see these in the collectible area behind glass, and they're going to cost hundreds of dollars. And you're like, wow, I spent $5 on that whole pack. Like, this is really happening. Hey, Mythoclass has the cards, and he loves it. So that's base. I think he's saying he has the foil Baphomet. Yeah, so I mean, we're pushing hard right now. I hope you guys all realize what you're getting involved with, and even if you don't, like, you're probably going to go to like a war trial for it later. So you should probably just be glad that you're our friends. We love you very much, guys. Thanks for being here. Get out of here, David. Take care.